Welcome. I am Daisy, your hostess. I invite you to join me for the reading of the book titled Mind of Light by Sri Auribundo. I came across this book after reading The Life of Buddha, which included The Middle Path and The Four Noble Truths. I have it here in my playlist. This is like a side quest I have. It's an interest in learning how different religions spawn from man's search for his creator. Yet there are three branches seeking to explain this ultimate truth: philosophy, science, and religion. Each one of them fumbling their way forward, sometimes on the same page, and at other times they're separate like oil and vinegar. Yet all along, quietly, faithfully, nature stands steadfast, holding the secrets in plain sight for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear, not judging one or the other, just steadfast and glorious. Sri Auribundo was a renowned Indian philosopher, yogi, and poet who pioneered the philosophy of integral yoga, aiming for the evolution of human consciousness into a divine supermind state, which I believe is what he advocates in this book. He addresses some of the limitations regarding evolution of consciousness and why it is limited by its natural conditions, where matter is the basis, where the physical life is the condition, and mind is the highest possible instrument. And what I found interesting is he shares a vision of human evolution which involves the prospect of a supreme divine manifestation by the conscious mind, one that is no longer veiled in a world of ignorance and illusion. And he offers a philosophical approach to this evolutionary emergence, addressing issues of the body, the desires, and the mind. And as I got closer to the end, I found myself pausing longer between paragraphs, envisioning such a possibility. At other times, I contemplated on the idea of time, because historically, we are told that there has been an enormous time lapse to bring us here. Time, not in minutes or hours or centuries, but in eons. And I know that that's like, I should actually specifically say science, because I know biblically or religiously, it almost happened, in 7 days? But anyway, the idea of eons was almost hurting my brain because it is said to be the longest unit of geological time, supposedly spanning hundreds of millions to billions of years. And according to scholars, the Earth's history is 4.6 billion years old. There were times I would pause and consider that nothing would be impossible under the right conditions. There are a few words that I had to look up because I was not familiar with them, and if you indulge me, which I hope you do, in allowing me to share some of these, I'd like to do that now. If I missed a few, feel free to mention them in the comments and add their meanings for us, and I thank you in advance. This is just a handful. These words are in Sanskrit, and that's an ancient Indo-Aryan language and the primary liturgical language of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism, originating in India over 3,500 years ago. Even such a common word as yoga, which is again derived from Sanskrit, the root word is yuj, meaning to join or to unite, totally different from the image I get in my mind of yoga. So it signifies this union of the individual consciousness with universal consciousness, or the harmonious integration of body, mind, and spirit. This gives me a whole new appreciation and understanding of yoga. The other word was ananda, a Sanskrit word meaning bliss or the profound spiritual joy found within. Then there was purusha. It is the fundamental Hindu concept of supreme consciousness, the cosmic self or pure spirit, also referred to as the person behind all creation. Okay, looks like somebody knows, right? The other word was sadhana, a Sanskrit term meaning a disciplined, committed, and daily spiritual practice aimed at achieving a specific goal, such as self-mastery, spiritual growth, or the union with the divine. And the last word that I'm going to share is deha, D-E-H-A, Sanskrit word meaning body, or form or embodiment, and again derived from the root D-D-I-H, to smear, to cover, and it signifies the material body that covers or envelops the soul. It represents the physical vessel used for spiritual life, often emphasizing the transient nature of our existence. So these are a few words. You might listen to them throughout just to be familiar when you run into them. Again, I hope that you enjoy this. Please do hit the like button, share this with like-minded friends, and yes, subscribe to the channel. I now turn the page. Mind of Light by Auribundo. Perfection of the body. The perfection of the body, as great a perfection as we can bring about by the means at our disposal, must be the ultimate aim of physical culture. Perfection is the true aim of all culture, the spiritual and psychic, the mental, the vital, and it must be the aim of our physical culture also. If our seeking is for a total perfection of the being, the physical part of it cannot be left aside, for the body is the material basis, the body is the instrument which we have to use. Shariram Kalu Dharma Sadhanam says the old Sanskrit adage, the body is the means of fulfillment of Dharma, and Dharma means every ideal which we can propose to ourselves and the law of its working out and its action. A total perfection is the ultimate aim which we set before us, for our ideal is the divine life which we wish to create here, the life of the spirit fulfilled on earth, life accomplishing its own spiritual transformation even here on earth in the conditions of the material universe. That cannot be unless the body too undergoes a transformation, unless its action and functioning attain to a supreme capacity and the perfection which is possible to it or which can be made possible. I have already indicated in a previous message a relative perfection of the physical consciousness in the body and of the mind, the life, the character, which it houses as no less than an awakening and development of the body's own native capacities, a desirable outcome of the exercises and practices of the physical culture to which we have commenced to give in this ashram a special attention and scope. A development of the physical consciousness must always be a considerable part of our aim, but for that the right development of the body itself is an essential element. Health, strength, fitness are the first needs, but the physical frame itself must be the best possible. A divine life in a material world implies necessarily a union of the two ends of existence, the spiritual summit and the material base. The soul, with the basis of its life established in matter, ascends to the heights of the spirit, but does not cast away its base. It joins the heights and the depths together. The spirit descends into matter, and the material world, with all its light and glories and powers, and with them fills and transforms life in the material world so that it becomes more and more divine. The transformation is not a change into something purely subtle and spiritual, to which matter is in its nature repugnant, and by which it is felt as an obstacle or as a shackle binding the spirit. It takes up matter as a form of the spirit, though now a form which conceals and turns it into a revealing instrument. It does not cast away the energies of matter, its capacities, its methods. It brings out their hidden possibilities, uplifts, sublimates, discloses their innate divinity. The divine life will reject nothing that is capable of divinization. All is to be seized, exalted, made utterly perfect. The mind, now still ignorant, though struggling towards knowledge, has to rise towards and into the supramental light and truth, and bring it down so that it shall suffuse our thinking and perception and insight and all our means of knowing till they become radiant with the highest truth in their most inmost and outermost movements. Our life, still full of obscurity and confusion and occupied with so many dull and lower aims, must feel all its urges and instincts exalted and irradiated and become a glorious counterpart of the supramental super life above. The physical consciousness and physical being, the body itself, must reach a perfection in all that it is and does, which now we can hardly conceive. You may even, in the end, be suffused with a light and beauty and bliss from the beyond, and the life divine assume a body divine. But first, the evolution of the nature must have reached a point at which it can meet the spirit direct, feel the aspiration towards the spiritual change, and open itself to the workings of the power which shall transform it. A supreme perfection, a total perfection, is possible only by a transformation of our lower or human nature, a transformation of the mind into a thing of light, our life into a thing of power, an instrument of right action, right use for all its forces, of a happy elevation of its being, lifting it beyond its present comparatively narrow potentiality for a self-fulfilling force of action and joy of life. There must be, equally, a transforming change of the body by a conversion of its action, its functioning, its capacities as an instrument beyond the limitations by which it is clogged and hampered, even in its greatest present human attainment. In the totality of the change we have to achieve, human means and forces too have to be taken up, not dropped, but used and magnified to their utmost possibility as part of the new life. Such a sublimation of our present human powers of mind and life into elements of a divine life on earth can be conceived without much difficulty. But in what figure shall we conceive the perfection of the body? In the past, the body has been regarded by spiritual seekers rather as an obstacle, as something to be overcome and discarded, than as an instrument of spiritual perfection and a field of the spiritual change. It has been condemned as a grossness of matter, as an insuperable impediment, and the limitations of the body as something unchangeable, making transformation impossible. This is because the human body, even at its best, seems only to be driven by an energy of life which has its own limits and is debased in its smaller physical activities by much that is petty or coarse or evil. The body in itself is burdened with the inertia and inconscience of matter, only partly awake, and although quickened and animated by nervous activity, subconscient in the fundamental action of its constituent cells and tissues and their secret workings. Even in its fullest strength and force and greatest glory of beauty, it is still a flower of the material inconscience. The inconscient is the soil from which it has grown, and at every point opposes a narrow boundary to the extension of its powers and to any effort of radical self-exceeding. But if a divine life is possible on earth, then this self-exceeding must also be possible. In the pursuit of perfection, we can start at either end of our range of being, and we have then to use, initially at least, the means and processes proper to our choice. In yoga, the process is spiritual and psychic. Even its vital and physical processes are given a spiritual or psychic turn and raised to a higher motion than belongs properly to the ordinary life and matter, as for instance in the hatha yogic and the raja yogic use of the breathing or the use of asana. Ordinarily, a previous preparation of the mind and life and body is necessary to make them fit for the reception of the spiritual energy and the organization of psychic forces and methods. But this too is given a special turn proper to the yoga. On the other hand, if we start in any field at the lower end, we have to employ the means and processes which life and matter offer to us, and respect the conditions and what we may call the technique imposed by the vital and the material energy. We may extend the activity, the achievement, the perfection attained beyond the initial, even beyond the normal possibilities, but still we have to stand on the same base with which we started and within the boundaries it gives to us. It is not that the action from the two ends cannot meet, and the higher take into itself and uplift the lower perfection. But this can usually be done only by a transition from the lower to a higher outlook, aspiration, and motive. This we shall have to do if our aim is to transform the human into the divine life. But here there comes in the necessity of taking up the activities of human life and sublimating them by the power of the Spirit. Here the lower perfection will not disappear. It will remain, but will be enlarged and transformed by the higher perfection which only the power of the Spirit can give. This will be evident if we consider poetry and art, philosophic thought, the perfection of the written word, or the perfect organization of earthly life. These have to be taken up, and the possibilities already achieved, or whatever perfection has already been attained, included in a new and greater perfection, but with the larger vision and inspiration of a spiritual consciousness, and with new forms and powers. It must be the same with the perfection of the body. The taking up of life and matter into what is essentially a spiritual seeking, instead of the rejection and ultimate exclusion of them, which was the attitude of a spirituality that shunned or turned away from life in the world, involves certain developments which a spiritual institution of the older kind could regard as foreign to its purpose. A divine life in the world, or an institution having that for its aim and purpose, cannot be or cannot remain something outside or entirely shut away from the life of ordinary man in the world, or unconcerned with the mundane existence. It has to do the work of the divine in the world, and not a work outside or separate from it. The life of the ancient rishis in their ashramas had such a connection. They were creators, educators, guides of men, and the life of the Indian people in ancient time was largely developed and directed by their shaping influence. The life and activities involved in the new endeavor are not identical, but they too must be an action upon the world and a new creation in it. It must have contacts and connections with it, and activities which take their place in the general life and whose initial or primary objects may not seem to differ from those of the same activities in the outside world. In our ashram here, we have found it necessary to establish a school for the education of the children of the resident satkas, teaching upon familiar lines, though with certain modifications, and taking as part and an important part of their development an intensive physical training, which has given form to the sports and athletics practiced by the jeunes sportive of the ashram, and of which this is the expression. It has been questioned by some what place sports can have in an ashram created for spiritual seekers, and what connection there can be between spirituality and sports. The first answer lies in what I have already written about the connections of an institution of this kind with the activities of the general life of men, and what I have indicated in previous number as to the utility such a training can have for the life in a nation and its benefit for the international life. Another answer can occur to us if we look beyond first objects and turn to the aspiration for a total perfection, including the perfection of the body. In the admission of an activity such as sports and physical exercises into the life of the ashram, it is evident that the methods and first objects to be attained must belong to what we have called the lower end of the being. Originally, they have been introduced for the physical education and bodily development of the children, and these are too young for strictly spiritual aim or practice to enter into their activities, and it is not certain that any great number of them will enter the spiritual life when they are of an age to choose what shall be the direction of their future. The object must be the training of the body and the development of certain parts of mind and character, so far as this can be done by or in connection with this training, and I have already indicated in a previous how in what directions this can be done. It is a relative and human perfection that can be obtained within these limits. Anything greater can be reached only by the intervention of higher powers, psychic powers, and the power of the spirit. Yet what can be attained within the human boundaries can be something very considerable and sometimes immense. What we call genius is part of the development of the human range of being, and its achievements, especially in things of the mind and will, can carry us halfway to the divine. Even what the mind and will can do with the body in the field proper to the body and its life, in the way of physical achievement, bodily endurance, feats of prowess of all kind, a lasting activity refusing fatigue or collapse and continuing beyond what seems at first to be possible, courage, and refusal to succumb under an endless and murderous physical suffering. These and other victories of many kinds, sometimes approaching or reaching the miraculous, are seen in the human field and must be reckoned as a part of our concept of a total perfection. The unflinching and persistent reply that can be made by the body as well as the mind of man and by his life energy to whatever call can be imposed on it in the most difficult and discouraging circumstances by the necessities of war and travel and adventure is of the same kind, and their endurance can reach astounding proportions, and even the inconscient in the body seems to be able to return a surprising response. The body, we have said, is a creation of the inconscient, and itself inconscient, or at least subconscient, in parts of itself and much of its hidden action. But what we call the inconscient is an appearance, a dwelling place, an instrument of a secret consciousness or a superconscient, which has created the miracle we call the universe. Matter is the field and the creation of the inconscient and the perfection of the operations of inconscient matter. Their perfect adaptation of means to an aim and end, the wonders they perform and the marvels of beauty they create, testify, in spite of all the ignorant denial we can oppose, to the presence and power of consciousness of this superconscious in every part and movement of the material universe. It is there in the body, has made it, and its emergence in our consciousness is the secret aim of evolution and the key to the mystery of our existence. In the use of such activities as sports and physical exercises for the education of the individual in childhood and first youth, which should mean the bringing out of his actual and latent possibilities to their fullest development, the means and methods we must use are limited by the nature of the body, and its aim must be such relative human perfection of the body's powers and capacities and those of the powers of mind, will, character, action of which it is at once the residence and the instrument so far as these methods can help to develop them. I have written sufficiently about the mental and moral parts of perfection to which these pursuits can contribute, and this I need not repeat here. For the body itself, the perfections that can be developed by these means are those of its natural qualities and capacities, and secondly, the training of its general fitness as an instrument for all the activities which may be demanded from it by the mind and the will, by the life energy, or by the dynamic perceptions, impulses, and instincts of our subtle physical being, which is an unrecognized but very important element and agent in our nature. Health and strength are the first conditions for the natural perfection of the body. Not only muscular strength and the solid strength of the limbs and physical stamina, but the finer, alert, and plastic and adaptable force which our nervous and subtle physical parts can put into the activities of the frame. There's also the still more dynamic force which a call upon the life energies can bring into the body and stir it to greater activities, even feats of the most extraordinary character of which in its normal state it would not be capable. There is also the strength which the mind and will, by their demands and stimulus and by their secret powers, which we use or by which we are used without knowing clearly the source of their action, can impart to the body or impose upon it as masters and inspirers. Among the natural qualities and powers of the body, which can be thus awakened, stimulated, and trained to a normal activity, we must reckon dexterity and stability in all kinds of physical action, such as swiftness in the race, dexterity in combat, skill and endurance of the mountaineer, the constant and often extraordinary response to all that can be demanded from the body of the soldier, sailor, traveler, or explorer, to which I have already made reference, or in adventure of all kinds, and all the wide range of physical attainment to which man has accustomed himself, or to which he is exceptionally pushed by his own will, or by the compulsion of circumstance. It is a general fitness of the body for all that can be asked from it, which is the common formula of all this action. A fitness attained by a few or by many that could be generalized by an extended and many-sided physical education and discipline. Some of these activities can be included under the name of sports. There are others for which sport and physical exercises can be an effective preparation. In some of them, a training for common action, combined movement, discipline are needed, and not for that our physical exercises can make one ready. In others, a developed individual will, skill of mind and quick perception, forcefulness of life energy, and subtle physical impulsion are more prominently needed and may even be the one sufficient trainer. All must be included in our conception of the natural powers of the body and its capacity and instrumental fitness in the service of the human mind and will, and therefore in our concept of the total perfection of the body. There are two conditions for this perfection: an awakening in as great an entity as possible of the body consciousness, and an education and evocation of its potentialities, also as entire and fully developed, and, it may be, as many-sided as possible. The form or body is, no doubt, in its origin a creation of the inconscient and limited by it on all sides, but still of the inconscient developing the secret consciousness concealed within it and growing in light of knowledge, power, and ananda. We have to take it at the point it has reached in its human evolution in these things, make as full use of them as may be, and, as much as we can, further this evolution to a degree as is permitted by the force of the individual temperament and nature. In all forms in the world there is a force at work, unconsciously active or oppressed by inertia in its lower formulations. But in the human being, consciousness from the first, with its potentialities partly awake, partly asleep or latent. What is awake in it we have to make fully conscious. What is asleep we have to arouse and set to its work. What is latent we have to evoke and educate. Here there are two aspects of the body consciousness, one which seems to be a kind of automatism, carrying on its work and in the physical plane without any intervention of the mind, and in its parts even beyond any possibility of direct observation by the mind, or, if conscious or observable, still proceeding or capable of continuing, when once started, by an apparently mechanical action not needing direction by the mind, and continuing so long as the mind does not intervene. There are other movements taught and trained by the mind which can yet go on operating automatically but faultlessly, even when not attended to by the thought or will. There are others which can operate in sleep and produce results of value to the waking intelligence. But more important is what may be described as a trained and developed automatism, a perfected skill and capacity of eye and ear, and the hands and all the members prompt to respond to any call made on them. A developed spontaneous operation as an instrument, a complete fitness for any demand that the mind and life energy can make upon it. This is ordinarily the best we can achieve at the lower end, when we start from that end and limit ourselves to the means and methods which are proper to it. For more we have to turn to the mind and life energy themselves, or to the energy of the spirit, and to what they can do for a greater perfection of the body. The most we can do in the physical field by the physical means is necessarily insecure as well as bound by limits. Even what seems a perfect health and strength of the body is precarious and can be broken down at any moment by fluctuations from within or by a strong attack or shock from outside. Only by the breaking of our limitations can a higher and more enduring perfection come. One direction in which our consciousness must grow is an increasing hold from within or from above on the body and its powers and its more conscious response to the higher parts of our being. The mind preeminently is man. He is a mental being, and his human perfection grows the more he fulfills the description of the Upanishad, a mental being, Purusha, leader of the life and the body. If the mind can take up and control the instincts and automatisms of the life energy and the subtle physical consciousness and the body, if it can enter into them, consciously use and, as we may say, fully mentalize their instinctive or spontaneous action, the perfection of these energies, their action too becomes more conscious and more aware of itself and more perfect. But it is necessary for the mind too to grow in perfection, and this it can do best when it depends less on the fallible intellect of physical mind, when it is not limited even by the more orderly and accurate working of the reason, and can grow in intuition and acquire a wider, deeper, and closer seeing and the more luminous drive of energy of a higher intuitive will. Even within the limits of its present evolution, it is difficult to measure the degree to which the mind is able to extend its control or its use of the body's powers and capacities, and when the mind rises to higher power still and pushes back its human boundaries, it becomes impossible to fix any limits. Even in certain realizations, an intervention by the will in the automatic working of the bodily organs seems to become possible. Wherever limitations recede, and in proportion as they recede, the body becomes a more plastic and responsive, and in that measure a more fit and perfect instrument of the action of the spirit. In all effective and expressive activities here in the material world, the cooperation of the two ends of our being is indispensable. If the body is unable, whether by fatigue or by natural incapacity or any other cause, to second the thought or will, or is in any way irresponsive or insufficiently responsive to that extent, the action fails or falls short, or becomes in some degree unsatisfying or incomplete. In what seems to be an exploit of the spirit so purely mental as the outpouring of poetic inspiration, there must be a responsive vibration of the brain and its openness as a channel for the power of the thought and vision and the light of the word that is making or breaking its way through or seeking for its perfect expression. If the brain is fatigued or dulled by any clog, either the inspiration cannot come and nothing is written, or it fails and something inferior is all that can come out, or else a lower inspiration takes the place of the more luminous formulation that was striving to shape itself, or the brain finds it more easy to lend itself to a less radiant stimulus, or else it labors and constructs or responds to poetic artifice. Even in the most purely mental activities, the fitness, readiness, or perfect training of the bodily instrument is a condition indispensable. That readiness, that response too, is part of the total perfection of the body. The essential purpose and sign of the growing evolution here is the emergence of consciousness in an apparently inconscient universe, the growth of the consciousness, and with it growth of the light and power of the being. The development of the form and its functioning or its fitness to survive, although indispensable, is not the whole meaning or the central motive. The greater and greater awakening of consciousness and its climb to a higher and higher level and a wider extent of its vision and action is the condition of our progress towards that supreme and total perfection which is the aim of our existence. It is the condition also of that total perfection of the body. There are higher levels of the mind than any we now conceive, and to these we must one day reach and rise beyond them to the heights of a greater, a spiritual existence. As we rise, we have to open to them our lower members and fill these with those superior and supreme dynamisms of light and power. The body we have to make a more and even entirely conscious frame and instrument, a conscious sign and seal and power of the spirit. As it grows in this perfection, the force and extent of its dynamic action and its response and service to the spirit must increase. The control of the spirit over it also must grow, and the plasticity of its functioning both in its developed and acquired parts of power and in its automatic responses down to those that are now purely organic and seem to be the movements of a mechanic in conscience. This cannot happen without a veritable transformation, and a transformation of the mind and life and very body is indeed the change to which our evolution is secretly moving. And without this transformation, the entire fullness of a divine life on earth cannot emerge. In this transformation, the body itself can become an agent and a partner. It might indeed be possible for the spirit to achieve a considerable manifestation with only a passive and imperfectly conscious body as its last or bottommost means of material functioning. But this could not be anything perfect or complete. A fully conscious body might even discover and work out the right material method and process of a material transformation. For this, no doubt, the Spirit's supreme light and power and creative joy must have manifested on the summit of the individual consciousness and sent down their fiat into the body. But still the body may take in the working out its spontaneous part of self-discovery and achievement. It would be thus a participator, an agent in its own transformation, and the integral transformation of the whole being. This too would be a part and a sign and evidence of the total perfection of the body. If the emergence and growth of consciousness is the central motive of the evolution and the key to its secret purpose, then by the very nature of that evolution, this growth must involve not only a wider and wider extent of its capacities, but also an ascent to a higher and higher level till it reaches the highest possible. For it starts from a nethermost level of involution in the inconscious, which we see at work with matter creating the material universe. It proceeds by an ignorance, which is yet ever developing knowledge, and reaching out to an ever greater light and ever greater organization and efficacy of the will and harmonization of all its own inherent and emerging powers. It must at last reach a point where it develops or acquires the complete fullness of its capacity, and that must be a state or action in which there is no longer an ignorance seeking for knowledge, but knowledge self-possessed, inherent in the being, master of its own truths, and working them out with a natural vision and force that is not afflicted by limitation or error. Or if there is a limitation, it must be a self-imposed veil behind which it would keep truth back for a manifestation in time, but draw it out at will and without any need of search or acquisition in the order of a right perception of things or in the just succession of that which has to be manifested in obedience to the call of time. This would mean an entry or approach into what might be called a truth consciousness, self-existence, in which the being would be aware of its own realities and would have the inherent power to manifest them in a time creation in which all would be truth following out its own unerring steps and combining its own harmonies. Every thought and will and feeling and act would be spontaneously right, inspired, or intuitive, moving by the light of truth, and therefore perfect. All would express inherent realities of the Spirit. Some fullness of the power of the Spirit would be there. One would have overpassed the present limitations of mind. Mind would become a seeing of the light of truth, will a force and power of the truth, life a progressive fulfillment of the truth, the body itself a conscious vessel of the truth, and part of the means of its self-effectuation, and a form of its self-aware existence. It would be at least some initiation of this truth consciousness, some first figure and action of it that must be reached and enter into a first operation if there is to be a divine life or any full manifestation of a spiritualized consciousness in the world of matter. Or at the very least, such a truth consciousness must be in communication with our own mind and life and body, descend into touch with it, control its seeing and action, impel its motives, take hold of its forces, and shape their direction and purpose. All touched by it might not be able to embody it fully, but each would give some form to it according to his spiritual temperament, inner capacity, the line of his evolution in nature. He would reach securely the perfection of which he was immediately capable, and he would be on the road to the full possession of the truth of the spirit and of the truth of nature. In the workings of such a truth consciousness, there would be a certain conscious seeing and willing automatism of the steps of its truth, which would replace the infallible automatism of the inconscient or seemingly inconscient force that has brought out of the apparent void the miracle of an ordered universe, and this could create a new order of the manifestation of the being in which a perfect perfection would become possible. Even a supreme and total perfection would appear in the vistas of an ultimate possibility. If we could draw down this power into the material world, our age-long dreams of human perfectibility, individual perfection, the perfectibility of the race, of society, inner mastery over self, and a complete mastery, governance, and utilization of the forces of nature could see at long last a prospect of total achievement. This complete human self-fulfillment might well pass beyond limitations and be transformed into the character of a divine life. Matter, after taking into itself and manifesting the power of life and the light of mind, would draw down into it the superior or supreme power and light of the spirit, and in an earthly body shed its parts of inconscience and become a perfectly conscious frame of the spirit. A secure completeness and stability of the health and strength of its physical tenement could be maintained by the will and force of this inhabitant. All the natural capacities of the physical frame, all powers of the physical consciousness would reach their utmost extension and be there at command and sure of their flawless action. As an instrument, the body would acquire a fullness of capacity, a totality of fitness for all uses which the inhabitant would demand of it far beyond anything now possible. Even it could become a revealing vessel of a supreme beauty and bliss, casting the beauty of the light of the spirit, suffusing and radiating from it as a lamp reflects and diffuses the luminosity of its indwelling flame, carrying in itself the beatitude of the spirit, its joy of the seeing mind, its joy of life and spiritual happiness, the joy of matter released into a spiritual consciousness and thrilled with a constant ecstasy. This would be the total perfection of the spiritualized body. All this might not come all at once, though such a sudden illumination might be possible if a divine power and light and Ananda could take their stand on the summit of our being and send down their force into the mind and life and body, illumining and remolding the cells, awaking consciousness in all the frame. But the way would be open, and the consummation of all that is possible in the individual could progressively take place. The physical also would have its share in that consummation of the whole. There would always remain vistas beyond as the infinite spirit took up towards higher heights and larger breadths the evolving nature, in the movement of the liberated being towards the possession of the supreme reality, the supreme existence, consciousness, beatitude. But of this it would be premature to speak. What has been written is perhaps as much as the human mind as it is now constituted can venture to look forward to, and the enlightened thought understand in some measure. These consequences of the truth consciousness descending and laying its hold upon matter would be a sufficient justification of the evolutionary labor. In this upward, all uplifting sweep of the spirit, there could be a simultaneous or consecutive downward sweep of the triumph of a spiritualized nature, all including, all transmuting, and in it there could occur a glorifying change of matter, and the physical consciousness and physical form and functioning of which we could speak as not only the total, but the supreme perfection of the body. The divine body. A divine life in a divine body is the formula of the ideal that we envisage. But what will be the divine body? What will be the nature of this body, its structure, the principle of its activity, the perfection that distinguishes it from the limited and imperfect physicality within which we are now bound? What will be the conditions and operations of its life, still physical, and its base upon the earth, by which it can be known as divine? If it is to be the product of an evolution, and it is so that we must envisage it, an evolution out of our human imperfection and ignorance into a greater truth of spirit and nature, by what process or stages can it grow into manifestation or rapidly arrive? The process of the evolution upon earth has been slow and tardy. What principle must intervene if there is to be a transformation, a progressive or sudden change? It is indeed as a result of our evolution that we arrive at the possibility of this transformation. As nature has evolved beyond matter and manifested life, beyond life and manifested mind, so she must evolve beyond mind and manifest a consciousness and power of our existence free from the imperfection and limitation of our mental existence, a supramental or truth consciousness, and able to develop the power and perfection of the spirit. Here, a slow and tardy change need no longer be the law or manner of our evolution. It will be only so to a greater or less extent, so long as a mental ignorance clings and hampers our ascent. But once we have grown into the truth consciousness, its power of spiritual truth of being will determine all. Into that truth we shall be freed, and it will transform mind and life and body. Light and bliss and beauty and a perfection of the spontaneous right action of all the being are these as native powers of the supermental truth consciousness, and these will, in their very nature, transform mind and life and body, even here upon earth, into a manifestation of the truth conscious spirit. The obscurations of earth will not prevail against the supermental truth consciousness, for even into the earth it can bring enough of the omniscient light and omnipotent force of the spirit to conquer. All may not open to the fullness of its light and power, but whatever does open must to that extent undergo the change. That will be the principle of transformation. It might be that a psychological change, a mastery of the nature by the soul, a transformation of the mind into a principle of light, of the life force into power and purity, would be the first approach, the first attempt to solve the problem, to escape beyond the merely human formula and establish something that could be called a divine life upon earth. A first sketch of supermanhood, of a supermental living in the circumstances of the earth nature. But this could not be the complete and radical change needed. It would not be the total transformation, the fullness of a divine life in a divine body. There would be a body still human and indeed animal in its origin and fundamental character, and this would impose its own inevitable limitations on the higher parts of the embodied being. As limitation by ignorance and error is the fundamental defect of an untransformed mind, as limitation by the imperfect impulses and strainings and wants of desire are the defects of an untransformed life force, so also imperfection of the potentialities of the physical action, an imperfection, a limitation in the response of its half-consciousness to the demands made upon it, and the grossness and stains of its original animality would be the defects of an untransformed or an imperfectly transformed body. These could not but hamper and even pull down towards themselves the action of the higher parts of the nature. A transformation of the body must be the condition for a total transformation of the nature. It might also be that the transformation might take place by stages. There are powers of the nature still belonging to the mental region which are yet potentialities of a growing gnosis lifted beyond our human mentality and partaking of the light and power of the divine, and an ascent through these planes. A descent of them into the mental being might seem to be the natural evolutionary course. But in practice, it might be found that these intermediate levels would not be sufficient for the total transformation, since, being themselves illumined potentialities of mental being, not yet supermental in the full sense of the word, they could bring down to the mind only a partial divinity, or raise the mind towards that, but not effectuate its elevation into the complete supra-mentality of the truth consciousness. Still, these levels might become stages of the ascent, which some would reach and pause there, while others went higher and could reach and live on superior strata of semi-divine existence. It is not supposed that all humanity would rise in a block into the supermind. At first, those only might attain to the highest or some intermediate height of the ascent whose inner evolution has fitted them for so great a change, or who are raised by the direct touch of the divine into its perfect light and power and bliss. The large mass of human beings might still remain for long content with a normal or only a partially illumined and uplifted human nature, but this would be itself a sufficiently radical change and initial transformation of earth life, for the way would be open to all who have the will to rise. The supra-mental influence of the truth consciousness would touch the earth life and influence even its untransformed mass, and a hope would be there, and a promise eventually available to all, which now only the few can share in or realize. In any case, these would be beginnings only, and could not constitute the fullness of the divine life upon earth. It would be a new orientation of the earthly life, but not the consummation of its change. For that there must be the sovereign reign of a supramental truth consciousness to which all other forms of life would be subordinated and depend upon it as the master principle and supreme power to which they could look up as the goal, profit by its influences, be moved and upraised by something of its illumination and penetrating force. Especially as the human body had to come into existence with its modification of the previous animal form and its erect figure of a new power of life, and its expressive movements and activities serviceable and necessary to the principle of mind and the life of a mental being, so too a body must be developed with new powers, activities, or degrees of a divine action expressive of a truth conscious being and proper to a supramental consciousness and manifesting a conscious spirit. All the capacity for taking up and sublimating all the activities of the earth life capable of being spiritualized must be there, a transcendence of the original animality and the actions incurably tainted by it, or at least some saving transformation of them, some spiritualizing or psychicizing of the consciousness and motive animating them, and the shedding of whatever could not be so transformed, even a change of what might be called its instrumental structure, its functioning and organization. A complete and hitherto unprecedented control of these things must be the consequence or incidental to this total change. These things have been already, to some extent, illustrated in the lives of many who have become possessed of spiritual powers, but as something exceptional and occasional, the casual or incomplete manifestation of an acquired capacity rather than the organization of a new consciousness, a new life, and a new nature. How far can such physical transformation be carried? What are the limits within it must remain to be consistent with life upon earth and without carrying that life beyond the earthly sphere or pushing it towards the supraterrestrial existence? The supramental consciousness is not a fixed quantity, but a power which passes to higher and higher levels of possibility until it reaches supreme consummations of spiritual existence, fulfilling supermind, and supermind fulfills the ranges of spiritual consciousness that are pushing towards it from the human or mental level. In this progression of the body also may reach a more perfect form, and a higher range of its expressive powers become a more and more perfect vessel of divinity. This destiny of the body has rarely in the past been envisaged, or else not for the body here upon earth. Such forms would rather be imagined or visioned as the privilege of celestial beings, and not possible as the physical residence of a soul still bound to terrestrial nature. The Vaishnavas have spoken of a spiritualized conscious body, Chinmaya Deha. There has been the conception of a radiant or luminous body, which might be the Vedic Jyotirmaya Deha. A light has been seen by some radiating from the bodies of highly developed spiritual persons, even extending to the emission of an enveloping aura, and there has been recorded an initial phenomenon of this kind in the life of so great a spiritual personality as Ramakrishna. But these things have been either conceptual only or rare and occasional, and for the most part the body has not been regarded as possessed of spiritual possibility or capable of transformation. It has been spoken of as the means of effectuation of the Dharma, and Dharma here includes all high purposes, achievements, and ideals of life, not excluding the spiritual change. But it is an instrument that must be dropped when its work is done, and though there may be and must be spiritual realization while yet in the body, it can only come to its full fruition after the abandonment of the physical frame. More ordinarily in the spiritual tradition, the body has been regarded as an obstacle, incapable of spiritualization or transmutation, and a heavy weight holding the soul to earthly nature and preventing its ascent either to spiritual fulfillment in the Supreme or to the dissolution of its individual being in the Supreme. But while this conception of the role of the body in our destiny is suitable enough for a sadhana that sees earth only as a field of the ignorance and earth life as a preparation for a saving withdrawal from life, which is the indispensable condition for spiritual liberation, it is insufficient for a sadhana which conceives of a divine life upon earth and liberation of earth nature itself as part of a total purpose of the embodiment of the spirit here. If a total transformation of the being is our aim, a transformation of the body must be an indispensable part of it. Without that, no full divine life on earth is possible. It is the past evolution of the body, and especially its animal nature and animal history, which seems to stand in the way of this consummation. The body, as we have seen, is an offspring and creation of the inconscient. Itself inconscient or only half conscious, it began as a form of unconscious matter, developed life, and from a material object became a living growth, developed mind, and from the subconsciousness of the plant and the initial rudimentary mind or incomplete intelligence of the animal, developed the intellectual mind and more complete intelligence of man, and now serves as the physical base, container, and instrumental means of our total spiritual endeavor. Its animal character and its gross limitations stand indeed as an obstacle to our spiritual perfection. But the fact that it has developed a soul and is capable of serving it as a means may indicate that it is capable of further development and may become a shrine and expression of the spirit, reveal a secret spirituality of matter, become entirely and not only have conscience, reach a certain oneness with the spirit. This much it must do. So far, at least, it must transcend its original earth nature, if it is to be the complete instrument of the divine life and no longer an obstacle. Still, the inconveniences of the animal body and its animal nature and impulses and the limitations of the human body at its best are there in the beginning and persist always, so long as there is not the full and fundamental liberation and its inconscience or half conscience and its binding of the soul and mind and life force to matter, to materiality of all kinds, to the call of the unregenerated earth nature, are there and constantly oppose the call of the spirit and circumscribe the climb to higher things. To the physical being it brings a bondage to the material instruments, to the brain and heart and sense, wed to materiality and materialism of all kinds, to the bodily mechanism and its needs and obligations, to the imperative need of food and the preoccupation with the means of getting it and storing it as one of the besetting interests of life, to fatigue and sleep, to the satisfaction of bodily desire. The life force in man also is tied down to these small things. It has to limit the scope of its larger ambitions and longings, its drive to rise beyond the pull of earth and follow the heavenlier intuitions of its psychic parts, the heart's ideal and the soul's yearnings. On the mind, the body imposes the boundaries of the physical being and the physical life, and the sense of the sole complete reality of physical things, which the rest as a sort of brilliant fireworks of the imagination, of lights and glories that can only have their full play in heavens beyond, on higher planes of existence, but not here. It afflicts the idea and aspiration with the burden of doubt, the evidence of the subtle senses and the intuition with uncertainty, and the vast field of supraphysical consciousness and experience with the imputation of unreality, and clamps down to its earth roots the growth of the spirit from its original limiting humanity into the supramental truth and the divine nature. These obstacles can be overcome, the denials and resistance of the body surmounted, its transformation is possible. Even the inconscient and animal part of us can be illumined and made capable of manifesting the God nature, even as our mental humanity can be made to manifest the superhumanity of the supramental truth consciousness and the divinity of what is now superconscious to us, and the total transformation made a reality here. But for this, the obligations and compulsions of its animality must cease to be obligatory, and a purification of its materiality effected, by which that very materiality can be turned into a material solidity of the manifestation of the divine nature. For nothing essential must be left out in the totality of the earth change. Matter itself can be turned into a means of revelation of the spiritual reality, the divine. The difficulty is dual, psychological and corporeal. The first is the effect of the unregenerated animality upon the life, especially by the insistence of the body's gross instincts, impulses, desires. The second is the outcome of our corporeal structure and organic instrumentation, imposing its restrictions on the dynamism of the higher divine nature. The first of these two difficulties is easier to deal with and conquer, for here the will can intervene and impose on the body the power of the higher nature. Certain of these impulses and instincts of the body have been found especially harmful by the spiritual aspirant and weighed considerably in favor of an ascetic rejection of the body. Sex and sexuality and all that springs from sex and testifies to its existence had to be banned and discarded from the spiritual life, and this, though difficult, is not at all impossible and can be made a cardinal condition for the spiritual seeker. This is natural and unescapable in all ascetic practice, and the satisfaction of this condition, though not easy as at first to fulfill, becomes after time quite feasible. The overcoming of the sex instinct and impulse is indeed blinding on all who would attain to self-mastery and lead the spiritual life. A total mastery over it is essential for all spiritual seekers, the eradication of it for the complete ascetic. This much has to be recognized and not diminished in its obligatory importance and its principle. But all recognition of the sex principle as apart from the gross physical indulgence of the sex impulse could not be excluded from a divine life upon earth. It is there in life, plays a large part, and has to be dealt with. It cannot simply be ignored, merely suppressed or held down or put away out of sight. It is in one or its aspect a cosmic and even a divine principle. It takes the spiritual form of the Ishwara and the Shakti, and without it there could be no world creation or manifestation of the world principle of Purusha and Prakriti, which are both necessary for the creation, necessary too in their association and interchange for the play of its psychological working, and in their manifestation as soul and nature fundamental to the whole process of the Lila. In the divine life itself, an incarnation, or at least in some form, a presence of the two powers or their initiating influence through their embodiments or representatives would be indispensable for making the new creation possible. In its human action, on the mental and vital level, sex is not altogether an undivine principle. It has its nobler aspects and idealities, and it has to be seen in what way and to what extent these can be admitted into the new and larger life. All gross animal indulgence of sex desire and impulse would have to be eliminated. It could only continue among those who are not ready for the higher life or not ready for a complete spiritual living. In all who aspire to it but could not yet take it up in its fullness, sex will have to be refined, submit to the spiritual or psychic impulse and a control by the higher mind and the higher vital, and shed all its lighter, frivolous, or degraded forms and feel the touch of the purity of the ideal. Love would remain, all forms of the pure truth of love in higher and higher steps till it realized its highest nature, widened into universal love, merged into the love of the divine. The love of man and woman would also undergo that elevation and consummation. For all that can feel a touch of the ideal and the spiritual must follow the way of ascent till it reaches the divine reality. The body and its activities must be accepted as part of the divine life and pass under this law. But as in the other evolutionary transitions, what cannot accept the law of the divine life cannot be accepted and must fall away from the ascending nature. Another difficulty that the transformation of the body has to face is its dependence for its very existence upon food, and here too are involved the gross physical instincts, impulses, desires that are associated with this difficult factor, the essential cravings of the palate, the greed of food and animal gluttony of the belly, the coarsening of the mind when it grovels in the mud of sense, obeys a servitude to its mere animal part, and hugs its bondage to matter. The higher human in us seeks refuge in a temperate moderation, in abstemiousness and abstinence, or in carelessness about the body and its wants, and in an absorption in higher things. The spiritual seeker often, like the giant ascetics, seeks refuge in long and frequent fasts which lift him temporarily, at least, out of the clutch of the body's demands, and help him to feel in himself a pure vacancy of the wide rooms of the spirit. But all this is not liberation, and the question may be raised whether, not only at first but always, the divine life also must submit to this necessity. But it could only deliver itself from it altogether if it could find out the way so to draw upon the universal energy that the energy would sustain not only the vital parts of our physicality, but its constituent matter, with no need of aid for sustenance from any outside substance of matter. It is indeed possible, even while fasting for very long periods, to maintain the full energies and activities of the soul and mind and life, even those of the body, to remain wakeful but concentrated in yoga all the time, or to think deeply and write day and night, to dispense with sleep, to walk 8 hours a day, maintaining all these activities separately or together, and not feel any loss of strength, any fatigue, any kind of failure or decadence. At the end of the fast, one can't even resume at once taking the normal or even a greater than normal amount of nourishment without any transition or precaution, such as medical science enjoins, as if both the complete fasting and the feasting were natural conditions, alternating by an immediate and easy passage from one to the other of a body already trained by a sort of initial transformation to be an instrument of the powers and activities of yoga. But one thing one does not escape, and that is the wasting of the material tissues of the body, its flesh and substance. Conceivably, if a practicable way and means could only be found, this last invisible obstacle too might be overcome, and the body maintained by an interchange of its forces with the forces of material nature, giving to her her need from the individual and taking from her directly the sustaining energies of her universal existence. Conceivably, one might rediscover and reestablish at the summit of the evolution of life the phenomenon we see at its base, the power to draw from all around it the means of sustenance and self-renewal. Or else, the evolved being might acquire the greater power to draw down those means from above rather than draw them up or pull them in from the environment around, all about it and below it. But until something like this is achieved or made possible, we have to go back to food and the established material forces of nature. In fact, we do, however, unconsciously draw constantly upon the universal energy, the force in matter to replenish our material existence, and the mental, vital, and other potencies in the body. We do it directly in the invisible processes of interchange constantly kept up by nature and by special means devised by her. Breathing is one of these, sleep also, and repose. But as her basic means for maintaining and renewing the gross physical body and its workings and inner potencies, nature has selected the taking in of outside matter in the shape of food, its digestion, assimilation of what is assimilable, and elimination of what cannot or ought not to be assimilated. This by itself is sufficient for mere maintenance. But for assuring health and strength in the body, so maintained, it has added the impulse towards physical exercise and play of many kinds, ways for the expenditure and renewal of energy, the choice or the necessity of manifold action and labor. In the new life, in its beginnings at least, it would not be necessary or advisable to make any call for an extreme or precipitate rejection of the need of food, or the established natural method for the maintenance of the still and perfectly transformed body. If or when these things have to be transcended, it must come as a result of the awakened will of the spirit, a will also in matter itself, an imperative evolutionary urge, an act of the creative transmutations of time, or a descent from the transcendence. Meanwhile, the drawing in of the universal energy by a conscious action of the higher powers of the being from around or from above, by a call to what is still to us a transcending consciousness, or by an invasion or descent from the transcendence itself, may well become an occasional, a frequent, or a constant phenomena, and even reduce the part played by food and its need to an incidence no longer preoccupying, a necessity minor and less imperative. Meanwhile, food and the ordinary process of nature can be accepted, although its use has to be liberated from attachment and desire, and the grosser undiscriminating appetites and clutch at the pleasures of the flesh, which is the way of the ignorance. The physical processes have to be subtilized, and the grossness may have to be eliminated, and new processes found or new instrumentalities emerge. So long as it is accepted, a refined pleasure in it may be permitted, and even a desireless ananda of taste take the place of the physical relish and the human selection by likings and dislikings, which is our present imperfect response to what is offered to us by nature. It must be remembered that for the divine life on earth, earth and matter have not to be and cannot be rejected, but have only to be sublimated and to reveal in themselves the possibilities of the spirit, serve the spirit's highest uses, and be transformed into instruments of a greater living. The divine life must always be actuated by the push towards perfection. A perfection of the joy of life is part and an essential part of it. The body's delight in things and the body's joy of life are not excluded from it. They too have to be made perfect. A large totality is the very nature of this new and growing way of existence, a fullness of possibilities of the mind transmuted into a thing of light, of the life converted into a force of spiritual power and joy, of the body transformed into an instrument of divine action, divine knowledge, divine bliss. All can be taken into its scope that is capable of transforming itself, all that can be an instrument, a vessel, an opportunity for the expression of this totality of the self-manifesting spirit. There is one problem raised by sex for those who would reject it in toto the obligations imposed by the animality of the body and put forward by it as an insistent opposition in the way of the aspirant to a higher life. It is the necessity of the prolongation of the race, for which the sex activity is the only means already provided by nature for living beings and inevitably imposed upon the race. It is not intended necessary for the individual seeker after a divine life to take up this problem, or even for a group who do not seek after it for themselves alone, but desire a wide acceptance of it by mankind as at least an ideal. There will always be the multitude who do not concern themselves with it or are not ready for its complete practice, and to these can be left the care for the prolongation of the race. The number of those who lead the divine life can be maintained and increased as the ideal extends itself by the voluntary adhesion of those who are touched by the aspiration, and their need be no resort to physical means for this purpose, no deviation from the rule of a strict sexual abstinence. But yet there may be the circumstances in which, from another standpoint, a voluntary creation of bodies for souls that seek to enter the earth life to help in the creation and extension of the divine life upon earth might be found to be desirable. Then the necessity of a physical procreation for this purpose could only be avoided if new means of a supraphysical kind were evolved and made available. A development of this kind must necessarily belong to what is now considered as the sphere of the occult, and the use of concealed powers of action or creation not known or possessed by the common mind of the race. Occultism means rightly the use of the higher powers of our nature, soul, mind, life force, and the faculties of the subtle physical consciousness to bring about results on their own or on the material plane by some pressure of their own secret law and its potentialities for manifestation and result in human or earthly mind and life and body, or in objects and events in the world of matter. A discovery or an extension of these little known or yet undeveloped powers is now envisaged by some well-known thinkers as a next step to be taken by mankind in its immediate evolution. The kind of creation spoken of has not been included among these developments, but it could well be considered as one of the new possibilities. Even physical science is trying to find physical means for passing beyond the ordinary instrumentation or procedure of nature in this matter of propagation or the renewal of the physical life force in human or animal beings. But the resort to occult means and the intervention of subtle physical processes, if it could be made possible, would be a greater way which could avoid the limitations, degradations, incompleteness, and heavy imperfection of the means and results solely available to the law of material force. In India, there has been always from the earliest times a widely spread belief in the possibility and reality of the use of these powers by men with an advanced knowledge of these secret things or with a developed spiritual knowledge and experience and dynamic force, and even in the tantras, an organized system of their method and practice. The intervention of the yogi in bringing about a desired birth of offspring is also generally believed in and often appealed to, and the bestowal on the child so obtained of a spiritual attainment or destiny by his will or his blessing is sometimes asked for, and such a result is recorded not only in the tradition of the past, but maintained by the witness of the present. But there is here still the necessity of a resort to the normal means of propagation and the gross method of physical nature. A purely occult method, a resort to supraphysical processes acting by supraphysical means for a physical result, would have to be possible if we are to avoid this necessity. The resort to the sex impulse and its animal process could not be transcended otherwise. If there is some reality in the phenomenon of materialization and dematerialization claimed to be possible by occultists and evidenced by occurrences many of us have witnessed, a method of this kind would not be out of the range of possibility. For in the theory of the occultist and in the gradation of the ranges and planes of our being, which yoga knowledge outlines for us, there is not only a subtle physical force, but a subtle physical matter intervening between life and gross matter, and to create in this subtle physical substance and precipitate the forms thus made into our grosser materiality is feasible. It should be possible, and it is believed to be possible for an object formed in this subtle physical substance to make a transit from its subtlety into the state of gross matter directly by the intervention of an occult force and process, whether with or even without the assistance or intervention of some gross material procedure. A soul wishing to enter into a body or form for itself a body and take part in a divine life upon earth might be assisted to do so, or even provided with such a form by this method of direct transmutation without passing through birth by the sex process or undergoing any degradation or any of the heavy limitations in the growth and development of its mind and material body inevitable to our present way of existence. It might then assume at once the structure and greater powers of functioning of the truly divine material body, which must one day emerge in a progressive evolution to a totally transformed existence, both of the life and form in a divinized earth nature. But what would be the internal or external form and structure, and what the instrumentation of this divine body? The material history of the development of the animal and human body has left it bound to a minutely constructed and elaborated system of organs and a precarious order of their functioning, which can easily become a disorder open to a general or local disorganization dependent on an easily disturbed nervous system and commanded by a brain whose vibrations are supposed to be mechanical and automatic and not under our conscious control. According to the materialist, all this is a functioning of matter alone, whose fundamental reality is chemical. We have to suppose that the body is constructed by the agency of chemical elements building up atoms and molecules and cells, and these again are the agents and only conductors at the basis of a complicated physical structure and instrumentation, which is the sole mechanical cause of all our actions, thoughts, feelings, the soul, affection, and mind, and life only a material and mechanical manifestation and appearance of this machine, which is worked out and automatically driven from a figment of consciousness in it by the forces inherent in inconscient matter. If that were the truth, it is obvious that any divinization or divine transformation of the body or of anything else would be nothing but an illusion, an imagination, a senseless and impossible chimera. But even if we suppose a soul, a conscious will at work in this body, it could not arrive at a divine transformation if there were no radical change in the bodily instrument itself and in the organization of its material workings. The transforming agent will be bound and stopped in its work by the physical organism's unalterable limitations and held up by the unmodified or imperfectly modified original animal in us. The possibility of the disorders, derangements, maladies native to these physical arrangements would still be there and could only be shut out by a constant vigilance or perpetual control obligatory on the corporeal instrument's spiritual inhabitant and master. This could not be called a truly divine body, for in a divine body, an inherent freedom from all these things would be natural and perpetual. This freedom would be a normal and native truth of its being and therefore inevitable and unalterable. A radical transformation of the functioning and, it may well be, of the structure and certainly of the two mechanical and material impulse and driving forces of the bodily system would be imperative. What agency could we find which could make the means of this all-important liberation and change? Something there is in us, or something has to be developed, perhaps a central and still occult part of our being containing forces whose powers in our actual and present makeup are only a fraction of what could be, but if they become complete and dominant, would be truly able to bring about, with the help of the light and force of the soul and the supramental truth consciousness of the necessary physical transformation and its consequences. This might be found in the system of chakras, revealed by tantric knowledge and accepted in the systems of yoga, conscious centers and sources of all the dynamic powers of our being, organizing their action through the plexuses and arranged in an ascending series from the lowest physical to the highest mind center and spiritual center called the thousand-petaled lotus, where ascending nature, the serpent power of the tantric, meets the Brahman and is liberated into the divine being. These centers are closed or half closed within us and have to be opened before their full potentiality can be manifested in our physical nature. But once they're opened and completely active, no limit can easily be set to the development of their potencies and the total transformation to be possible. But what would be the result of the emergence of these forces and their liberated and diviner action on the body itself? What their dynamic connection with it and their transforming operation on the still existing animal nature and its animal impulses and gross material procedure? It might be held that the first necessary change would be the liberation of the mind, the life force, the subtle physical agencies, and the physical consciousness into a freer and a diviner activity, a many-dimensioned and unlimited operation of their consciousness, a large outbreak of higher powers, and the sublimation of the bodily consciousness itself, of its instrumentation, capacity, capability for the manifestation of the soul in the world of matter. The subtle senses now concealed in us might come forward into a free action, and the material senses themselves become means or channels for the vision of what is now invisible to us, or the discovery of things surrounding us, but at present unseizable and held back from our knowledge. A firm check might be put on the impulses of the animal nature, or they may be purified and subtilized so as to become assets and not liabilities, and so transformed as to be parts and processes of a diviner life. But even these changes would still leave a residue of material processes keeping the old way and not amenable to the higher control, and if this could not be changed, the rest of the transformation might itself be checked and incomplete. A total transformation of the body would demand a sufficient change of the most material part of the organism, its constitution, its processes, and its setup of nature. Again, it might be thought that a full control would be sufficient, a knowledge and a vision of this organism and its unseen action, and an effective control determining its operations according to the conscious will. This possibility has been affirmed as something already achieved and a part of the development of the inner powers in some. The cessation of the breathing while still the life of the body remained stable, the hermetic sealing up at will, not only of the breath, but of all the vital manifestations for long periods, the stoppage of the heart similarly at will while thought and speech and other mental workings continued unabated. These and other phenomena of the power of the will over the body are known and well attested examples of this kind of mastery. But these are occasional or sporadic successes and do not amount to transformation. A total control is necessary and an established and customary and indeed a natural mastery. Even with that achieved, something more fundamental might have to be demanded for the complete liberation and change into a divine body. Again, it might be urged that the organic structure of the body, no less than its basic outer form, would have to be retained as a necessary material foundation for the retention of the earth nature, the connection of the divine life with the life of earth, and a continuance of the evolutionary process so as to prevent a breaking upward out of and away from it into a state of being which would properly belong to a higher plane and not to a terrestrial divine fulfillment. The prolonged existence of the animal itself in our nature, if sufficiently transformed to be an instrument of manifestation and not an obstacle, would be necessary to preserve the continuity, the evolutionary total. It would be needed as the living vehicle, vahana, of the emergent God in the material world, where he would have to act and achieve the works and wonders of the new life. It is certain that a form of body making this connection and a bodily action containing the earth dynamism and its fundamental activities must be there. But the connection should not be a bond or a confining limitation or a contradiction of the totality of the change. The maintenance of the present organism without any transformation of it would not but act as such a bond and confinement within the old nature. There would be a material base, but it would be of the earthy, an old and not a new earth with a divine or psychological structure. For with that structure the old system would be out of harmony, and it would be unable to serve its further evolution or even to uphold it as a base in matter. It would bind part of the being, a lower part, to an untransformed humanity and unchanged animal functioning, and prevent its liberation into the superhumanity of the supramental nature. A change is then necessary here too, a necessary part of the total bodily transformation, which would divinize the whole man, at least in the ultimate result, and not leave his evolution incomplete. This aim, it must be said, would be sufficiently served if the instrumentation of the centers and their forces reigned over all the activities of the nature with an entire domination of the body, and made it both in its structural form and its organic workings a free channel and means of communication and a plastic instrument of cognition and dynamic action for all that they had to do in the material life, in the world of matter. There would have to be a change in the operative processes of the material organs themselves, and it may well be in their very constitution and their importance. They could not be allowed to impose their limitations imperatively on the new physical life. To begin with, they might become more clearly outer ends of the channels of communication and action, more serviceable for the psychological purposes of the inhabitant, less blindly material in the responses, more conscious of the act, and aim of the inner movements and powers which use them and which they are wrongly supposed by the material man in us to generate and to use. The brain would be a channel of communication of the form of the thoughts and a battery of their insistence on the body and the outside world, where they could then become effective directly, communicating themselves without physical means from mind to mind, producing with a similar directness effects on the thoughts, actions, and lives of others, or even upon material things. The heart would equally be a direct communicant and a medium of interchange for the feelings and emotions thrown outward upon the world by the forces of the psychic center. Heart could reply directly to heart. The life force come to the help of other lives and answer their call in spite of strangeness and distance. Many beings without any external communication thrill with the message and meet in the secret lights from one divine center. The will might control the organs that deal with food, safeguard automatically the health, eliminate greed and desire, substitute subtler processes, or draw in strength and substance from the universal life force so that the body could maintain for a long time its own strength and substance without loss or waste, remaining thus with no need of sustenance by material elements, and yet continue to strenuous action with no fatigue or pause for sleep or repose. The soul's will, or the mind's, could act from higher sources upon the sex center and the sex organs so as to check firmly or even banish the grosser sexual impulse or stimulus, and instead of serving an animal excitation or crude drive or desire, turn their use to the storing, production, and direction towards brain and heart and life force of the essential energy, ojas, of which this region is the factory, so as to support the works of the mind and soul and spirit and the higher life powers, and limit the expenditure of the energy on lower things. The soul, the psychic being, could more easily fill all with the light and turn the very matter of the body to higher uses for its own greater purpose. This would be a first potent change, but not by any means all that is possible or desirable, for it may well be that the evolutionary urge would proceed to a change of the organs themselves in their material working, and use and diminish greatly the need of their instrumentation and even of their existence. The centers and the subtle body, Suksma Sarira, of which one would become conscious and aware of all going on in it, would pour their energies into material nerve and plexus and tissue and radiate them through the whole material body. All the physical life and its necessary activities in this new existence could be maintained and operated by these higher agencies in a freer and ampler way and by a less burdensome and restricting method. This might go so far that these organs might cease to be indispensable and even be felt as too obstructive. The central force might use them less and finally throw aside their use altogether. If that happened, they might waste by atrophy, be reduced to an insignificant minimum, or even disappear. The central force might substitute for them subtle organs of a very different character, or, if anything material was needed, instruments that would be forms of dynamism or plastic transmitters rather than that we know as organs. This might well be part of a supreme total transformation of the body, though this too might not be final. To envisage such changes is to look far ahead, and minds attached to the present form of things may be unable to give credence to their possibility. No such limits and no such impossibility of any necessary change can be imposed on the evolutionary urge. All has to be fundamentally changed. On the contrary, all has to be preserved that is still needed in the totality, but all has to be perfected. Whatever is necessary for the evolutionary purpose, for the increasing, enlarging, heightening of the consciousness, which seems to be its central will and aim here, or the progression of its enabling means and preserving environment, has to be kept and furthered. But what has to be overpassed, whatever has no longer a use or is degraded, what has become unhelpful or retarding, can be discarded and dropped on the way. That has been evident in the history of the evolution of the body from its beginning in elementary forms to its most developed type, the human. There is no reason why this process should not intervene in the transition from the human into the divine body. For the manifestation or building of a divine body on earth, there must be an initial transformation, the appearance of a new, a greater, and more developed type, not a continuance with little modifications of the present physical form and its limited possibilities. What has to be preserved must indeed be preserved, and that means whatever is necessary or thoroughly serviceable for the uses of the new life on earth. Whatever is still needed and will serve its purpose but imperfect will have to be retained but developed and perfected. Whatever is no longer of use for new aims or its a disability must be thrown aside. The necessary forms and instrumentations of matter must remain, since it is in a world of matter that the divine life has to manifest, but their materiality must be refined, uplifted, ennobled, illumined, since matter and the world of matter have increasingly to manifest the indwelling spirit. The new type, the divine body, must continue the already developed evolutionary form. There must be a continuation from the type nature has all along been developing, a continuity from the human to the divine body, no breaking away to something unrecognizable, but a high sequel to what has already been achieved and in part perfected. The human body has in its part and instruments that have been sufficiently evolved to serve the divine life. These have to survive in their form, though they must be still further perfected, their limitations of range and use removed, their liability to defect and malady and impairment eliminated, their capacities of cognition and dynamic action carried beyond the present limits. New powers have to be acquired by the body, which our present humanity could not hope to realize, could not even dream of, or could only imagine. But that can now only be known, worked out, or created by the use of invented tools and machinery might be achieved by the new body in its own power, or by the inhabitant spirit through its own direct spiritual force. The body itself might acquire new means and ranges of communication with other bodies, new processes of acquiring knowledge, a new athesis, new potencies of manipulation of itself and objects. It might not be impossible for it to possess or disclose means native to its own constitution, substance, or natural instrumentation for making the far near and annulling distance, cognizing what is now beyond the body's cognizance, acting where action is now out of its reach or its domain, developing subtleties and plasticities which could not be permitted under present conditions to the needed fixity of a material frame. These and other numerous potentialities might appear and the body become an instrument immeasurably superior to what we can now imagine as possible. There could be an evolution from a first apprehending truth consciousness to the utmost heights of the ascending ranges of the supermind, and it may pass the borders of the supermind proper itself, where it begins to shadow out, develop, delineate expressive forms of life touched by a supreme pure existence, consciousness, and bliss, which constitute the worlds of a highest truth of existence, dynamism of tapas, glory and sweetness of bliss, the absolute essence and pitch of the all-creating Ananda. The transformation of the physical being might follow this incessant line of progression, and the divine body reflect or reproduce here in a divine life on the earth something of this highest greatness and glory of the self-manifesting spirit. Supermind and the life divine. A divine life upon earth, the ideal we have placed before us, can only come about by a spiritual change of our being and a radical and fundamental change, an evolution or revolution of our nature. The embodied being upon earth would have to rise out of the domination over it of its veils of mind, life, and body into the full consciousness and possession of its spiritual reality, and its nature also would have to be lifted out of the consciousness and power of consciousness proper to a mental, vital, and physical being into the greater consciousness and greater power of being and the larger and freer life of the spirit. It would not lose these former veils, but they would no longer be veils or imperfect expressions, but true manifestations. They would be changed into states of light, powers of spiritual life, vehicles of spiritual existence. But this again could not be if mind, life, and body were not taken up and transformed by a state of being and a force of being superior to them. A power of supermind as much above our incomplete mental nature as that is above the nature of animal life and animated matter, as it is immeasurably above the mere material nature. The supermind is, in its very essence, a truth consciousness, a consciousness always free from the ignorance which is the foundation of our present natural or evolutionary existence, and from which nature in us is trying to arrive at self-knowledge and world knowledge and a right consciousness and the right use of our existence in the universe. The supermind, because it is a truth consciousness, has this knowledge inherent in it. And this power of true existence, its course is straight and can go direct to its aim. Its field is wide and can even be illimitable. This is because its very nature is knowledge. It has not to acquire knowledge, but possesses it in its own right. Its steps are not from nescience or ignorance into some imperfect light, but from truth to greater truth, from right perception to deeper perception, from intuition to intuition, from illumination to utter and boundless luminousness, from growing wideness to the utter vast and to the very infinitude. On its summits, it possesses the divine omniscience and omnipotence, but even in an evolutionary movement of its own graded self-manifestation by which it would eventually reveal its own highest heights, it must be, in its very nature, essentially free from ignorance and error. It starts from truth and light and moves always in truth and light. As its knowledge is always true, so too its will is always true. It does not fumble in its handling of things or stumble in its paces. In the supermind, feeling and emotion do not depart from their truth. Make no slips or mistakes. Do not swerve from the right and the real. Cannot misuse beauty and delight or twist away from a divine rectitude. In the supermind sense, cannot mislead or deviate into the grossness which are here its natural imperfections and the cause of reproach, distrust, and misuse by our ignorance. Even an incomplete statement made by the supermind is a truth leading to a further truth, its incomplete action a step towards completeness. All the life and action and leading of the supermind is guarded in its very nature from the falsehoods and uncertainties that are our lot. It moves in safety towards its perfection. Once the truth consciousness was established here on its own sure foundation, the evolution of divine life would be a progress in felicity, a march through light to Ananda. Supermind is an eternal reality of the divine being and the divine nature. In its own plane, it already and always exists and possesses its own essential law of being. It has not to be created or to emerge or evolve into existence out of involution in matter or out of non-existence, as it might seem to the view of mind, which itself seems to its own view to have so emerged from life and matter, or to have evolved out of an involution in life and matter. The nature of supermind is always the same, a being of knowledge, proceeding from truth to truth, creating or rather manifesting what has to be manifested by the power of a pre-existent knowledge, not by hazard, but by a self-existent destiny in the being itself, a necessity of the thing in itself, and therefore inevitable. Its manifestation of the divine life will also be inevitable. Its own life on its own plane is divine, and if supermind descends upon the earth, it will bring necessarily the divine life with it and establish it here. Supermind is the grade of existence beyond mind, life, and matter, and as mind, life, and matter have manifested on the earth, so too must supermind in the inevitable course of things manifest in this world of matter. In fact, a supermind is already here, but it is involved, concealed behind this manifest mind, life, and matter, and not yet acting overtly or in its own power. If it acts, it is through these inferior powers and modified by their characters, and so not yet recognizable. It is only by the approach and arrival of the descending supermind that it can be liberated upon earth and reveal itself in the action of our material, vital, and mental parts, so that these lower powers can become portions of a total divinized activity of our whole being. It is that will bring to us a completely realized divinity or the divine life. It is indeed so that life and mind involved in matter have realized themselves here, for only what is involved can evolve. Otherwise, there could be no emergence. The manifestation of a supramental truth consciousness is therefore the capital reality that will make the divine life possible. It is when all the movements of thought, impulse, and action are governed and directed by a self-existent and luminously automatic truth consciousness, and our whole nature comes to be constituted by it and made of its stuff, that the life divine will be complete and absolute. Even as it is, in reality, though not in the appearance of things, it is a secret self-existent knowledge and truth that is working to manifest itself in the creation here. The divine is already there, immanent within us, ourselves, in our inmost reality, and it is this reality that we have to manifest. It is that which constitutes the urge towards the divine living and makes necessary in creation of the life divine, even in this material existence. A manifestation of the supermind and its truth consciousness is then inevitable. It must happen in this world sooner or later, but it has two aspects: a descent from above and ascent from below, a self-revelation of the spirit and evolution in nature. The ascent is necessarily an effort, a working of nature, an urge or nisus on her side to raise her lower parts by an evolutionary or revolutionary change, conversion, or transformation into the divine reality, and it may happen by a process and progress or by a rapid miracle. The descent or self-revelation of the spirit is an act of the supreme reality from above, which makes the realization possible, and it can appear either as the divine aid which brings about the fulfillment of the progress and process, or as the sanction of the miracle. Evolution, as we see it in this world, is a slow and difficult process, and indeed needs usually ages to reach abiding results. But this is because it is in its nature an emergence from inconscient beginnings, a start from the nescience, and a working in the ignorance of natural beings by what seems to be an unconscious force. There can be, on the contrary, an evolution in the light and no longer in the darkness, in which the evolving being is a conscious participant and cooperator, and this is precisely what must take place here. Even in the effort and progress from the ignorance to knowledge, this must be in part, if not wholly, the endeavor to be made on the heights of the nature, and it must be wholly that in the final movement towards the spiritual change, realization, transformation. It must be still more so when there is a transition across the dividing line between the ignorance and the knowledge, and the evolution is from knowledge to greater knowledge, from consciousness to greater consciousness, from being to greater being. There is then no longer any necessity for the slow pace of the ordinary evolution. There can be rapid conversion, quick transformation after transformation, what would seem to our normal present mind a succession of miracles. An evolution on the supramental levels could well be of that nature. It could be equally, if the being so chose, a more leisurely passage of one supramental state or condition of things to something beyond, but still supramental from level to divine level, a building up of divine gradations, a free growth to the supreme supermind, or beyond it, to yet undreamed levels of being, consciousness, and ananda. The supramental knowledge, the truth consciousness of the supermind, is in itself one and total. Even when there is a voluntary limitation of the knowledge, or what might seem to be a partial manifestation, it is so voluntarily. The limitation does not proceed from or result in any kind of ignorance. It is not a denial or withholding of knowledge, for all the rest of the truth that is not brought into expression is implicit there. Above all, there are no contradictions. Whatever would seem to be opposites to the mind here carry in themselves their own right relation and reconciling agreement, if indeed any reconciliation were needed, for the harmony of these apparent opposites is complete. The mind tends to put the personal and the impersonal in face of each other as if they were two contraries, but the supermind sees and realizes them as, at the lowest, complements and mutually fulfilling powers of the single reality, and, more characteristically, as interfused and inseparable, and themselves that single reality. The person has his aspect of impersonality, inseparable from himself, without which he could not be what he is or could not be his whole self. The impersonal is in its truth not a state of existence, a state of consciousness, and a state of bliss, but a being self-existent, conscious of self, full of his own self-existent bliss, the very substance of his being. So the one single and illimitable person, Purusha. In the supermind, the finite does not cut up or limit the infinite, does not feel itself contrary to the infinite, but rather it feels its own infinity. The relative and temporal is not a contradiction of eternity, but a right relation of its aspects, a native working, or an imperishable feature of the eternal. Time there is only the eternal in extension, and the eternal can be felt in the momentary. Thus the integral divine is there in the supermind, and no theory of illusion or self-contradiction Maya need be thrust in to justify its way of existence. It will be obvious that an escape from life is not necessary for the divine to find itself or its reality. It possesses that always, whether in cosmic life or in its transcendent existence. The divine life cannot be a contradiction of the divine or of the supreme reality. It is part of that reality, an aspect or expression of it, and it can be nothing else. In life on the supramental plane, all the divine is possessed, and when the supermind descends on earth, it must bring the divine with it and make that full possession possible here. The divine life will give to those who enter into it and possess it an increasing and finally a complete possession of the truth consciousness and all that it carries in it. It will bring with it the realization of the divine in self and the divine in nature. All that is sought by the God-seeker will be fulfilled in his spirit and in his life as he moves towards spiritual perfection. He will become aware of the transcendent reality, possess in the self-experience the supreme existence, consciousness, bliss, beyond with Sakidananda. He will become one with cosmic being and universal nature. He will contain the world in himself, in his own cosmic consciousness, and feel himself one with all beings. He will see himself in all and all in himself, become united and identified with the self, which has become all existences. He will perceive the beauty of all beautiful and the miracle of the all wonderful. He will enter in the end into the bliss of Brahman and live abidingly in it, and for all this he will not need to shun existence or plunge into the annihilation of the spiritual person in some self-extinguishing nirvana. As in the self, so in nature, he can realize the divine. The nature of the divine is light and power and bliss. He can feel the divine light and power and bliss above him and descending into him, filling every strand of his nature, every cell and atom of his being, flooding his soul and mind and life and body, surrounding him like an illimitable sea and filling the world, suffusing all his feeling and sense and experience, making all his life truly and utterly divine. This, and all else that the spiritual consciousness can bring to him, the divine life will give him when it reaches its utmost completeness and perfection, and the supramental truth consciousness is fulfilled in all himself. But even before that, he can attain to something of it all, grow in it, live in it, once the supermind has descended upon him and has the direction of his existence. All relations with the divine will be his. The trinity of God knowledge, divine works, and devotion to God will open within him and move towards an utter self-giving and surrender of his whole being and nature. He will live in God and with God, possess God, as it is said, even plunge in him, forgetting all separate personality, but not losing it in self-extinction. The love of God and all the sweetness of love will remain his. The bliss of contact as well as the bliss of oneness and the bliss of difference in oneness. All the infinite ranges of experience of the infinite will be his, and all the joy of the finite in the embrace of the infinite. The descent of the supermind will bring to one who receives it and is fulfilled in the truth consciousness all the possibilities of the divine life. It will take up not only the whole characteristic experience which we recognize already as constituting the spiritual life, but also all which we now exclude from the category, but which is capable of divinization, not excluding whatever of the earth nature, and the earth life can be transformed by the touch of the supermind and taken up into the manifested life of the spirit. For a divine life on earth need not be a thing apart and exclusive, having nothing to do with the common earthly existence. It will take up human being and human life, transform what can be transformed, spiritualize whatever can be spiritualized, cast its influence on the rest, and effectuate either a radical or an uplifting change, bring about a deeper communion between the universal and the individual, invade the ideal with the spiritual truth of which it is a luminous shadow, and help to uplift into or towards a greater and higher existence. Mind it will uplift towards a diviner light of thought and will, life towards deeper and truer emotion and action, towards a larger power of itself, towards high aims and motives. Whatever cannot yet be raised into its own full truth of being, it will bring nearer to that fullness. Whatever is not ready even for that change will still see the possibility open to it whenever its still incomplete evolution has made it ready for fulfillment. Even the body, if it can bear the touch of supermind, will become more aware of its own truth, for there is a body consciousness that has its own instinctive truth and power of right condition and action. Even a kind of unexpressed occult knowledge in the constitution of its cells and tissues, which may one day become conscious and contribute to the transformation of the physical being. An awakening must come in the earth nature and in the earth consciousness, which will be, if not the actual beginning, at least the effective preparation and the first steps of its evolution towards a new and diviner world order. This would be the fulfillment of divine life, which the descent of supermind and the working of the truth consciousness taking hold of the whole nature of the living being would bring about in all who could open themselves to its power or influence. Even its first immediate effect would be on all who are capable, the possibility of entering into the truth consciousness and changing all the movements of the nature, more and more into the movements of the supramental truth, truth of thought, truth of will, truth in the feelings, truth in the acts, true conditions of the whole being, even to the body, eventually transformation, a divinizing change. For those who could so open themselves and remain open, there would be no limitation to this development, and even no fundamental difficulty. For all difficulties would be dissolved by the pressure of the supramental light and power from above pouring itself into the mind and the life force and the body. But the result of the supramental descent need not be limited to those who could thus open themselves entirely, and it need not be limited to the supramental change. There could also be a minor or secondary transformation of the mental being within a freed and perfected scope of the mental nature. In place of the human mind as it is now is a mind limited imperfect, open at every moment to all kinds of deviation from the truth or missing of the truth, all kinds of error and openness, even to the persuasions of a complete falsehood and the perversion of the nature. A mind blinded and pulled down towards inconscience and ignorance, hardly arriving at knowledge, an intellect prone to interpret the higher knowledge in abstractions and indirect figures, seizing and holding even the messages of the higher intuition with an uncertain and disputed grasp. There could emerge a true mind, liberated and capable of the free and utmost perfection of itself and its instruments, a life governed by the free and the illumined, a body responsive to the light and able to carry out all that the free mind and will could demand of it. This change might happen not only in the few, but extend and generalize itself in the race. This possibility, if fulfilled, would mean that the human dream of perfection, perfection of itself, of its purified and enlightened nature, of all its way of action and living, would be no longer a dream, but a truth that could be made real, and humanity lifted out of the hold on it of inconscience and ignorance. The life of the mental being could be harmonized with the life of the supermind, which will then be the highest order above it, and become even an extension and annex of the truth consciousness, a part and province of the divine life. It is obvious that if the supermind is there and an order of supramental being is established as the leading principle in earth nature, as mind is now the leading principle, but with a sureness, a complete government of the earthly existence, a capacity of transformation of all upon their level and within their natural boundaries of which the mind, in its imperfection, was not capable. An immense change of human life, even if it did not extend to transformation, would be inevitable. It remains to consider what might be the obstacles in the way of this possibility, especially those offered by the nature of the earth order and its function as a field of a graded evolution in which our humanity is a stage, and it might be argued its very imperfection and evolutionary necessity. How far could or would supermind by its presence and government of things overcome this difficulty while respecting the principle of gradation, and whether it could not rectify the wrong and ignorant order imposed by the ignorance and inconscience and substitute for it a right gradation in which the perfection and divinization would be possible? Certainly, the way for the individual would be open. Whatever group of human beings aspires united in an endeavor at a perfect and individual collective living, or aspired to the divine life, would be assisted towards the attainment of its aspiration. That at least the supermind would make its minimum consequence, but the greater possibility is also there and might even be offered to the whole of humanity. This, then, we have to consider. What would be the descent of the supermind mean for mankind? And what would be its result or its promise for the whole life and evolutionary future and destiny of the human race? Supermind and humanity. What then would be the consequence for humanity of the descent of supermind into our earthly existence, its consequence for this race born into a world of ignorance and inconscience, but capable of an upward evolution of its consciousness and an ascent into the light power and bliss of a spiritual being and spiritual nature? The descent into the earth life of so supreme a creative power as the supermind and its truth consciousness could not be merely a new feature or factor added to that life or put in its front, but without any other importance, or only a restricted importance carrying with it no results profoundly affecting the rest of earth nature. Especially, it could not fail to exercise an immense influence on mankind as a whole, even a radical change in the aspect and prospect of its existence here. Even this power had no other capital result on the material world in which it had come down to intervene. One cannot but conclude that the influence the change made would be far-reaching, even enormous. It would not only establish the supermind and a supramental race of beings upon the earth, it could bring about an uplifting and transforming change in mind itself, and as an inevitable consequence in the consciousness of man, the mental being, and would equally bring about a radical and transforming change in the principles and forms of his living, his ways of action, and the whole build and tenor of his life. It would certainly open to man the access to the supramental consciousness and the supramental life. For we must suppose that it is by such a transformation that a race of supramental beings would be created, even as the human race itself has arisen by a less radical, but still a considerable uplifting and enlargement of consciousness and conversion of the body's instrumentation and its indwelling and evolving mental and spiritual capacities and powers out of a first animal state. But even without any such complete transformation, the truth principle might so far replace the principle we see here of an original ignorance seeking for knowledge and arriving only at a partial knowledge that the human mind could become a power of light, of knowledge finding itself, not the denizen of a halfway twilight or a servant and helper of the ignorance, a purveyor of mingled truth and error. Mind might even become in man what it is in its fundamental origin, a subordinate, limited, and special action of the supermind, a sufficiently luminous receptacle of truth, and at least all falsity in its works might cease. It could at once be objected that this would alter the whole evolutionary order and its balance and leave an incurable gap in its completeness. There would be an unabridged gulf between man and the animal, and no way for the evolutionary nisus to a journey over it in the progress of consciousness from animality to divinity. For some kind of divinity would be involved in the suggested metamorphosis. It might be contended that the true process of evolution is to add a new principle, degree, or stage to the already existing order, and not to make any alteration in any previously established feature. Man came into being, but the animal remained the animal and made no progress towards the half-humanity. All slight modifications of consciousness, capacities, or habits in domestic animals produced by the association with man or by his training of them are only slight alterations of the animal intelligence. Still, less can the plants move towards animal consciousness or brute matter become in the slightest degree, even subconsciously or half subconsciously aware of itself, or responsive or reactive. The fundamental distinctions remain and must remain unaltered in the cosmic order. But this objection presumes that the new humanity must be all of one level. There may well be gradations of consciousness in it which would bridge the distance between its least developed elements and the higher animals who, although they cannot pass into a semi-human kind, might still progress towards a higher animal intelligence. For certain experiments show that these are not at all entirely unprogressive. These gradations would serve the purpose of the transition quite as well as the least developed humans in the present scale, without leaving a gap so wide as to disturb the evolutionary order of the universe. A considerable saltus can, as it is, be observed separating the different orders, matter and the plant and the lower animals, one species of animals and another, as well as that always existing and large enough between the highest animal and man. There would therefore be no incurable breach in the evolutionary order, no such distance between human mind and animal mind, between the new type of human being and the old animal level, as could not be overleaped or would create an unbridgeable gulf for the most developed animal soul in its passage to the least developed type of the new humanity. A leap, a saltus there would be, as there is now, but it would not be between animality and divinity. From animal mind to supermind, it would be between a most highly developed animal mind turning towards human possibilities. For without the passage from animal to man could not be achieved, and a human mind waking to the possibility, not yet the full achievement, of its own higher yet unattained capacities. One result of the intervention of supermind in the earth nature, the descent of the supreme creative truth power, might well be a change in the law of evolution, its method and its arrangement. A larger element of the principle of evolution through knowledge might enter into the forces of the material universe. This might extend itself from a first beginning in the new creation and produce increasing effects in the order which is now wholly an evolution in the ignorance, and indeed starts from the complete nescience of the inconscient and proceeds towards what can be regarded, even in its highest attainment of knowledge, as a lesser ignorance, since it is more a representation than a direct and complete possession of knowledge. If man began to develop the powers and means of a higher knowledge in something like fullness, if the developing animal opened the door of his mentality to beginnings of consciousness, thought, and even a rudimentary reason, at his highest, he is not so irrevocably far from that even now. If the plant developed its first subconscient reactions and attained to some kind of primary nervous sensitiveness, if matter, which is a blind form of the spirit, were to become more alive with the hidden power within it and to offer more readily the secret sense of things, the occult realities it covers, as for instance, the record of the past, it always preserves even in its thumb inconscience, or the working of its involved forces and invisible movements revealing veiled powers in material nature to a subtler generalized perception of the new human intelligence. This would be an immense change, promising greater changes in the future, but it would mean only an uplifting and not a disturbance of the universal order. Evolution would itself evolve, but it would not be perturbed or founder. It is difficult for us to conceive in theory or admit as a practical possibility the transformation of the human mentality I have suggested as a change that would naturally take place under the lead of the supramental truth consciousness, because our notions about mind are rooted in an experience of human mentality in a world which starts from inconscience and proceeds through a first almost complete nescience and a slowly lessening ignorance towards a higher degree, but always in complete scope and imperfect method of only partially equipped knowledge, which does not serve fully the needs of a conscience always pushing towards its own still immeasurable distant absolute. The visible imperfections and limitations of mind in the present stage of its evolution here we take as part of its very nature, but in fact the boundaries in which it is still penned are only temporary limits and measures of its still incomplete evolutionary advance. Its defects of methods and means are faults of its immaturity and not proper to the constitution of its being. Its achievement, although extraordinary under the hampering conditions of the mental being weighed down by its instrumentation in an earthly body, is far below and not beyond what will be possible to it in its illumined future. For mind is not in its very nature an inventor of errors, a father of lies bound down to a capacity of falsehood, wedded to its own mistakes, and the leader of a stumbling life, as it is too largely is at present owing to our human shortcomings. It is in its origin a principle of light, an instrument put forth from the supermind, and, though set to work within limits and even set to create limits, yet the limits are luminous borders for a special working, voluntary and purposive bounds, a service of the finite, ever extending itself under the eye of infinity. It is this character of mind that will reveal itself under the touch of supermind and make human mentality an adjunct and a minor instrumentation of the supramental knowledge. It will even be possible for the mind no longer limited by the intellect to become capable of a sort of mental gnosis, a luminous reproduction of the truth in a diminished working, extending the power of the light not only to its own, but to lower levels of consciousness in their climb towards self-transcendence. Overmind, intuition, illumined mind, and what I have called higher mind, these and other levels of a spiritualized and liberated mentality, will be able to reflect in the uplifted human mind and its purified and exalted feeling and force of life and action something of their powers and prepare the ascent of the soul to their own plateaus and peaks of an ascending existence. This is essentially the change which can be contemplated as a result of the new evolutionary order, and it would mean a considerable extension of the evolutionary field itself, and will answer the question as to the result on humanity of the advent of supermind into the earth nature. If mind in its origin from supermind is itself a power of supermind, a principle of light, and a power of light, or a force for knowledge specialized in its action for a subordinate purpose, yet it assumes a different aspect when in the working out of this purpose it separates itself more and more from the supramental light, from the immediate power and supporting illumination of the supramental principle. It is as it departs more and more in this direction from its own highest truth that it becomes a creator or parent of ignorance, and is or seems to be the highest power in a world of ignorance. It becomes itself subject to ignorance, and seems only to arrive at a partial and imperfect knowledge. The reason of this decline is that it is used by the supermind principally for the work of differentiation, which is necessary if there is to be a creation and a universe. In the supermind itself, in all its creation, there is this differentiating power, the manifestation of the one in the many, and the many in the one. But the one is never forgotten or lost in its multiplicity, which always consciously depends upon and never takes precedence over the eternal oneness. In the mind, on the contrary, the differentiation, the multiplicity does take precedence, and the conscious sense of the universal oneness is lost, and the separated unit seems to exist for itself and by itself as a sufficient self-conscious integer, or in an inanimate objects as the inconscient integer. It should be noted, however, that a world or plane of mind need not be a reign of ignorance where falsity, error, or nescience must have a place. It may be only a voluntary self-limitation of knowledge. It could be a world where all possibilities capable of being determined by mind could manifest themselves in the successions of time and find a true form and field of their action, the expressive figure of themselves, their capacity of self-development, self-realization of a kind, self-discovery. This is actually what we meet when we follow in psychic experience the line of descent by which the involution takes place, which ends in matter and the creation of the material universe. What we see here is not the planes or worlds of the descent in which mind and life can keep something of their truth and something of the light of the spirit, something of their true and real being. Here we see an original in conscience and a struggle of life and mind and spirit to evolve out of the material inconscience and in a resultant ignorance to find themselves and grow towards their full capacity and highest existence. If mind succeeds in that endeavor, there is no reason why it should not recover its true character and be once more a principle and power of light, and even in its own way aid in the workings of a true and complete knowledge. At its highest, it might pass out of its limitations into the supramental truth and become part and function of the supramental knowledge, or at the least serve for a minor work of differentiation in the consensus of that knowledge. In the lower degree below supermind, it might be a mental gnosis, a spiritual or spiritualized perception, feeling, activity, sense which could do the works of knowledge and not of ignorance. Even at a still lower level, it could be an increasingly luminous passage leading from light to light, from truth to truth, and no longer a circling in the mazes of half-truth and half-nescience. This would not be possible in a world where untransformed mind or human mind, burdened with its hampering disabilities, as it is now, will be the leader or the evolution's highest achievement. But with supermind for the leading and dominating power, this might well happen. It might even be regarded as one result, and an almost inevitable result of its descent into the human world and its touch on the mind of humanity. How far this would go, whether the whole of humanity would be touched or only part of it ready for the change, would depend on what was intended or possible in the continued order of the universe. If the old evolutionary principle and order must be preserved, then only a section of the race would pass onward. The rest would keep the old human position, level and functioning in the ascending order. But even so, there must be a passage or bridge between the two levels or orders of being by which the evolution would make its transition from one to the other. The mind would there be capable of contact with and modification by the supramental truth, and thus would be the means of the soul's passing on upward. There must be a status of mind capable of receiving and growing in the light towards supermind, though not reaching it. Through that, as even now happens in a lesser degree through a dimmer medium, the luster of a greater truth would send down its rays for the liberation and uplift of the soul in the ignorance. Supermind is here veiled behind a curtain, and though not organized for its own characteristic action, it is the true cause of all creation here. The power for the growth of truth and knowledge and the ascension of the soul towards the hidden reality. But in a world where supermind has made its appearance, it could hardly be a separate factor isolated from the rest. It would inevitably not only create Superman, but change and uplift man. A total change of the mental principle, such as has been suggested, cannot be ruled out as impossible. Mind as we know it has a power of consciousness quite distinct from supermind, no longer a power devolved from it, connected with it and dependent upon it, but practically divorced from its luminous origin, is marked by several characteristics which we conceive to be the very signs of its nature. But some of these belong to supermind also, and the difference is in the way and scope of their action, not in their stuff or in their principle. The difference is that mind is not a power of whole knowledge, and only when it begins to pass beyond itself, a power of direct knowledge, it receives rays of the truth but does not live in the sun. It sees as through glasses, and its knowledge is colored by its instruments. It cannot see with the naked eye or look straight at the sun. It is not possible for mind to take its stand in the solar center or anywhere in the radiant body or even on the shining circumference of the orb of perfect truth and acquire or share in its privilege of infallible or absolute knowledge. It would be only if it had already drawn near to the light of supermind that it could live anywhere near the sun in the full splendor of its rays, in something of the full and direct blaze of truth, and the human mind, even at its highest, is far from that. It can only live at most in a limited circle, in some narrow beginnings of a pure insight, a direct vision, and it would take long for it, even in surpassing itself, to reach to an imitative and fragmentary reflection of a dream of the limited omniscience and omnipotence which is the privilege of a delegated divinity, of the God, of a demiurge. It is a power for creation, but either tentative and uncertain and succeeding by good chance, or the favor of circumstance, or else, if assured by some force of practical ability or genius, subject to flaw or pent within unescapable limits. Its highest knowledge is often abstract, lacking in a concrete grasp. It has to use expedients and unsure means of arrival to rely upon reasoning, argumentation, and debate, inferences, divinations, set methods of inductive or deductive logic, succeeding only if it is given correct and complete data, and even then liable to reach on the same data different results and varying consequences. It has to use means and accept results of a method which is hazardous even when making a claim to certitude, and of which there would be no need if it had a direct or a supra-intellectual knowledge. It is not necessary to push the description further. All this is the very nature of our terrestrial ignorance, and its shadow hangs on even to the thought and vision of the sage and the seer, and can be escaped only if the principle of a truth conscious supramental knowledge descends and takes up the governance of the earth nature. It should be noted, however, that even at the bottom of the involutionary descent, in the blind eclipse of consciousness and matter, in the very field of the working of the inconscient, there are signs of the labor of an infallible force, the drive of a secret consciousness and its promptings, as if the inconscient itself were secretly informed or impelled by a power with a direct and absolute knowledge. Its acts of creation are infinitely surer than the workings of our human consciousness at its best, or the normal workings of the life power. Matter, or rather the energy in matter, seems to have a more certain knowledge, a more infallible operation of its own, and its mechanism, once set going, can be trusted for the most part to do its work accurately and well. It is so that man is able, taking hold of a material energy, to mechanize it for his own ends and trust it under proper conditions to do for him his work. The self-creating life power, amazingly abundant in its invention and fantasy, yet seems to be more capable of flaw, aberration, and failure. It is as if its greater consciousness carried in it a greater capacity for error. Yet it is sure enough ordinarily in its workings. But as consciousness increases in the forms and operations of life, and most when mind enters in, disturbances also increase, as if the increase of consciousness brought with it not only richer possibilities, but more possibilities of stumbling, error, flaw, and failure. In mind, in man, we seem to reach the height of this antinomy, the greatest, highest, widest reach and achievements of consciousness, the greatest amount of uncertainty, defect, failure, and error. This, we may conjecture, may be because in inconscient nature there is a truth of energy at work which follows infallibly its own law, an energy which can walk blindfold without stumbling, because the automatic law of the truth is within its operating surely without swerving or mistake when there is no external intervention or interference. But in all normally automatic processes of existence there is this law. Even the body has an unexpressed knowledge of its own, a just instinct in its action within certain limits, and this, when not interfered with by life's desires and mind's errors, can work with a certain accuracy and sureness. But Supermind alone has the truth consciousness in full, and if this comes down and intervenes, mind, life, and body too can attain to the full power of the truth in them and their full possibility of perfection. This, no doubt, would not take place at once, but an evolutionary progress towards it could begin and grow with increasing rapidity towards its fullness. All men might not reach that fullness till a later time, but still the human mind could come to stand perfected in the light, and a new humanity take its place as part of the new order. This is the possibility we have to examine. If it is destined to fulfill itself, if man is not doomed to remain always as a vassal of the ignorance, the disabilities of the human mind on which we have dwelt are not such as must remain irredeemably in possession and binding forever. It could develop higher means and instrumentalities, pass over the last borders of the ignorance into a higher knowledge, grow too strong to be held back by the animal nature. There would be a liberated mind, escaping from ignorance into light, aware of its affiliation to Supermind, a natural agent of Supermind, and capable of bringing down the supramental influence into the lower reaches of being, a creator in the light, a discoverer in the depths, an illuminant in the darkness, helping perhaps to penetrate even the inconscient with the rays of a secret superconscience. There would be a new mental being, not only capable of standing enlightened in the radiance of the supermind, but able to climb consciously towards it and into it, training life and body to reflect and hold something of the supramental light, power, and bliss, aspiring to release the secret divinity into self-finding and self-fulfillment and self-poise, aspiring towards the ascension to the divine consciousness, able to receive and bear the descent of the divine light and power, fitting itself to be a vessel of the divine life. Supermind in the evolution. A new humanity would then be a race of mental beings on the earth and in the earthly body, but delivered from its present conditions in the reign of the cosmic ignorance so far as to be possessed of a perfected mind. A mind of light, which could even be a subordinate action of the supermind or truth consciousness, and in any case capable of the full possibilities of mind acting as a recipient of that truth, and at least a secondary action of it in thought and life. It could even be a part of what could be described as a divine life upon earth, and at least the beginnings of an evolution in the knowledge, and no longer entirely or predominantly in the ignorance. How far this would go, whether it would eventually embrace the whole of humanity or only an advanced portion of it, would depend upon the intention in the evolution itself, on the intention in whatever cosmic or transcendent will is guiding the movements of the universe. We have supposed not only the descent of the supermind upon the earth, but its embodiment in a supramental race with all its natural consequences, and a new total action in which the new humanity would find its complete development and its assured place in the new order. But it is clear that all this could only come as a result of the evolution which is already taking place upon earth, extending far beyond its present bounds and passing into a radically new movement governed by a new principle in which mind and man would be subordinate elements and no longer mind the utmost achievement or man the head or leader. The evolution we see around us at present is not of that kind, and, it might be said, shows few signs of such a possibility, so few that the reason, at present our only sure guide, has no right to hazard belief in it. Earth, the earth we see, with its lives deeply immersed and founded in inconscience and ignorance, is not built for such a development or capable of holding such an advent. Its materiality and limitations condemn it to be permanently the field of a far inferior order. It may be said, too, that for such an order there must be a place somewhere, and even if supermind is not a mere unwarranted speculation and is a concrete reality, there is no need and no place for it embodying itself here. Mind, as marking the full play of the knowledge possible to the ignorance, must have its field somewhere, and to keep the earth as its natural field would best serve the economy of cosmic nature. A materialistic philosophy would admit of no possibility of a divine life in matter, but even a philosophy admitting a soul or spirit or a spiritual terminus of the evolutionary movement here could very well deny the capacity of earth for a divine life. A divine existence could only be achieved by a departure from earth and the body. Even if cosmic existence is not an illusion or maya, a divine or a completely spiritual being is likely to be possible only in another less material world, or only in the pure spirit. At any rate, to the normal human reason, the odds seem to be heavily against any early materialization on earth of anything divine. Again, if too strong a stress is laid on the present or apparent character of the evolution here, as it is presented to us by physical science, it might be urged that there is no warrant for expecting any emergence of a principle higher than human mind, or of any such thing as superhuman beings in a world of matter. Consciousness is itself dependent upon matter and material agencies for its birth and its operations, and an infallible truth consciousness, such as we suppose supermind to be, would be a contradiction of these conditions and must be dismissed as chimera. Fundamentally, physical science regards evolution as a development of forms and vital activities. The development of a larger and more capable consciousness is a subordinate result of the development of life and form, and not a major or essential characteristic or circumstance, and it cannot go beyond limits determined by the material origin of mind and life. Mind has shown itself capable of many extraordinary achievements, but independence of the material organ or of physical conditions or a capability for any such thing as a power of direct and absolute knowledge not acquired by material means would be beyond the conditions imposed by nature. At a certain point, therefore, the evolution of consciousness can go no further, even if a something definite and independent which we call a soul exists. It is limited by its natural conditions here, where matter is the basis, physical life the condition, mind the highest possible instrument, there is no possibility of an action of consciousness apart from the body or surpassing this physical, vital, or mental nature. This fixes the limits of our evolution here. It might be suggested also that until something clearly recognizable like supermind manifests itself with some definiteness and fullness, or until it descends and takes possession of our earth consciousness, we cannot be certain that it exists. Till then, mind holds the place as a general arbiter or field of reference for all knowledge, and mind is incapable of any certain or absolute knowledge. It has to, no doubt, all, to test all and yet to achieve all, but cannot be sure in its knowledge or its achievement. That incidentally establishes the necessity of such a principle as the supermind or truth consciousness in any intelligible universe, for without it there is no issue, no goal for either life or knowledge. Consciousness cannot achieve its own entire meaning, its own supreme result without it. It will end in an inconsequence or a fiasco. To become aware of its own truth, and all truth is the very aim of its existence, and it cannot do so so long as it has to tend towards truth, towards knowledge in ignorance, and through the ignorance, it must develop, or it must reach a power of itself whose very nature is to know, to see, to possess in its own power. This is what we call supermind, and once it is admitted, all the rest becomes intelligible. But till then, we are in doubt, and it may be contended that even if supermind is admitted as a reality, there can be no certainty of its advent and reign. Till then, all effort towards it may end in failure. It is not enough that the supermind should be actually there above us. Its descent a possibility or a future intention in nature. We have no certainty of the reality of this descent until it becomes an objectivized fact in our earthly being. Light has often tried to descend upon the earth, but the light remains unfulfilled and incomplete. Man may reject the light. The world is still full of darkness, and the advent seems to be little more than a chance. This doubt is to some extent justified by the actualities of the past and still existing possibilities of the future. Its power to stand would disappear only if supermind is once admitted as a consequent part of the order of the universe. If the evolution tends from matter to supermind, it must also tend to bring down supermind into matter, and the consequences are inevitable. The whole trouble of this incertitude arises from the fact that we do not look straight at the whole truth of the world as it is and draw from it the right conclusion as to what the world must be and cannot fail to be. This world, no doubt, based ostensibly upon matter, but its summit is spirit, and the ascent towards spirit must be the aim and justification of its existence and the pointer to its meaning and purpose. But the natural conclusion to be drawn from the supremacy and summit existence of spirit is clouded by a false or imperfect idea of spirituality, which has been constructed by intellect in its ignorance, and even by its too hasty and one-sided grasp at knowledge. The spirit has been thought of not as something all-pervading and the secret essence of our being, but as something only looking down on us from the heights and drawing us only towards the heights and away from the rest of existence. So we get the idea of our cosmic and individual being as a great illusion, and departure from it and extinction in our consciousness of both individual and cosmos as the only hope, the sole release. Or we build up the idea of the earth as a world of ignorance, suffering, and trial, and our only future and escape into heavens beyond. There is no divine prospect for us here, no fulfillment possible even with the utmost evolution on earth in the body, no victorious transformation, no supreme object to be worked out in terrestrial existence. But if supermind exists, if it descends, if it becomes the ruling principle, all that seems impossible to mind becomes not only possible, but inevitable. If we look closely, we shall see that there is a straining of mind and life on their heights towards their own perfection, towards some divine fulfillment, towards their own absolute. That, and not only something beyond and elsewhere, is the true sign, The meaning of this constant evolution and the labor of continual birth and rebirth and the spiral ascent of nature. But it is only by the descent of supermind and the fulfillment of mind and life by their self-exceeding that this secret intention in things, this hidden meaning of spirit and nature can become utterly overt and in its totality realizable. This is the evolutionary aspect and significance of supermind. But in truth, it is an eternal principle existing covertly even in the material universe, the secret supporter of all creation. It is that which makes the emergence of consciousness possible and certain in an apparently inconscient world and compels a climb in nature towards a supreme spiritual reality. It is, in fact, and already and always existent plane of being, the nexus of spirit and matter, holding in its truth and reality and making certain the whole meaning and aim of the universe. If we disregard our present ideas of evolution, all changes. If we can regard consciousness and not life and form as the fundamental and essential evolutionary principle and its emergence and full development of its possibilities as the object of the evolutionary urge, then conscience of matter cannot be an insuperable obstacle. For in this inconscience can be detected an involved consciousness which has to evolve. Life and mind are steps and instruments of that evolution. The purposeful drive and workings of the inconscient material energy, and precisely such as we can attribute to the presence of an involved consciousness, automatic, not using thoughts like the mind, but guided by something like an inherent material instinct, practically infallible in all its steps, not yet cognitive, but miraculously creative. The entirely and inherently enlightened truth consciousness we attribute to supermind would be the same reality appearing at an ultimate stage of the evolution, finally evolved and no longer wholly involved as in matter or partly and imperfectly evolved and therefore capable of imperfection and error as in life and mind, now possessed of its own natural fullness and perfection, luminously automatic, infallible. All the objections to a complete evolutionary possibility then fall away. It would, on the contrary, be the inevitable consequence contained not only in nature as a whole, but even in material nature. In this vision of things, the universe will reveal itself in its unity and totality as a manifestation of a single being, nature as its power of manifestation, evolution as its process of gradual self-revelation here in matter. We would see the divine series of the worlds as a ladder of ascent from matter to supreme spirit. There would reveal itself the possibility, the prospect of a supreme manifestation by the conscious, and no longer a veiled and enigmatic descent of the spirit and its powers in their fullness even into this lowest world of matter. The riddle of the universe need be no longer a riddle. The dubious mystery of the things would put off its enigma, its constant ambiguity. The tangled writings would become legible and intelligible. In this revelation, supermind would take its natural place and no longer be a matter of doubt or questioning to an intelligence bewildered by the complexity of the world. It would appear as the inevitable consequence of the nature of mind, life, and matter, the fulfillment of their meaning, their inherent principle and tendencies, the necessary perfection of their imperfection, the summit to which all are climbing, the consummation of divine existence, consciousness and bliss to which it is leading, the last result of the birth of things and supreme goal of this progressive manifestation which we see here in life. The full emergence of supermind may be accomplished by a sovereign manifestation, a descent into earth consciousness, and a rapid assumption of its powers and disclosing of its forms and the creation of a supramental race and a supramental life. This must indeed be the full result of its action in nature. But this has not been the habit of evolutionary nature in the past upon earth, and it may well be that the supramental evolution also will fix its own periods, though it cannot be at all a similar development to that of which earth has hitherto been the witness. But once it has begun, all must unavoidably and perfectly manifest, and all parts of nature must tend towards a greatest possible luminousness and perfection. It is this certainty that authorizes us to believe that mind and humanity also will tend towards the realization that will be far beyond our present dreams of perfection. A mind of light will replace the present confusion and trouble of this earthly ignorance. It is likely that even those parts of humanity which cannot reach it will yet be aware of its possibility and consciously tend towards it. Not only so, but the life of humanity will be enlightened, uplifted, governed, harmonized by this luminous principle, and even the body becomes something much less powerless, obscure, and animal in its propensities, and capable instead of a new and harmonized perfection. It is this possibility that we have to look at, and that would mean a new humanity uplifted into light, capable of a spiritualized being and action, open to governance by some light of the truth consciousness, capable even on the mental level and in its own order of something that might be called the beginning of a divinized life. Mind of light. A new humanity means for us the appearance, the development of a type or race of mental beings whose principle of mentality would be no longer a mind in the ignorance seeking for knowledge, but even in its knowledge bound to the ignorance, a seeker after light, but not its natural possessor, open to the light, but not an inhabitant of the light, not yet a perfected instrument, truth conscious and delivered out of the ignorance. Instead, it would be possessed already of what could be called a mind of light, a mind capable of living in the truth, capable of being truth conscious and manifesting in its life a direct in place of an indirect knowledge. Its mentality would be an instrument of the light and no longer of the ignorance. At its highest, it would be capable of passing into the supermind, and from the new race would be recruited the race of supra-mental beings who would appear as the leaders of the evolution in earth nature. Even the highest manifestations of a mind of light would be an instrumentality of the supermind, a part of it or a projection from it, a stepping beyond humanity into the superhumanity of the supramental principle. Above all, its possession would enable the human being to rise beyond the normalities of his present thinking, feeling, and being into those highest powers of the mind in its self-exceedings which intervene between our mentality and supermind, and can be regarded as steps leading towards the greater and more luminous principle. This advance, like others in the evolution, might not be reached, and would naturally not be reached at one bound, but from the very beginning it would be inevitable. The pressure of the supermind, creating from above out of itself the mind of light, would compel this certainty of the eventual outcome. The first gleamings of the new light would carry in themselves the seed of its highest flamings. Even in the first beginnings, the certainty of their topmost powers would be there, for this is the constant story of each evolutionary emergence. The principle of its highest perfection lies concealed in the involution which precedes and necessitates the evolution of the secret principle. For throughout the story of evolution, there are two complementary aspects which constitute its action and are necessary to its totality. There is hidden in the involution of nature the secret power and principle of being which lies concealed under the veil cast on it by material nature, and there is carried in that nature itself the inevitable force of the principle compelling the process of emergence of its inherent powers and characters, the essential features which constitute its reality. As the evolutionary principle emerges, there are also two constant features of the process of the emergence. There are the gradations by which it climbs out of the involution and manifests more and more of its power, its possibilities, the force of the Godhead within it, and there is a constant manifestation of all types and forms of its being, which are the visible, indicative, and efficient embodiments of its essential nature. There appear in the evolutionary process organized forms and activities of matter, the types of life and the living beings, the types of mind and the thinking beings, the luminosities and greatness of the spiritual principle, and the spiritual beings whose nature, character, personality mark the stages of the ascent towards the highest heights of the evolution and the ultimate largest manifestation of what it is in itself and must become by the force of time and the all-revealing spirit. This is the real sense and drive of what we see as evolution. The multiplication and variation of forms is only the means of its process. Each gradation contains the possibility and the certainty of the grades beyond it. The emergence of more and more developed forms and powers point to more perfected forms and greater powers beyond them, and each emergence of consciousness and the conscious beings proper to it enables the rise to a greater consciousness beyond and the greater order of beings up to the ultimate Godheads of which nature is striving and is destined to show herself capable. Matter developed its organized forms until it became capable of embodying living organisms. Then life rose from the subconscious of the plant into conscious animal formations, and through them to the thinking life of man. Mind, founded in life, developed intellect, developed its types of knowledge and ignorance, truth and error, till it reached the spiritual perception and illumination, and now can see, as in a glass dimly, the possibility of supermind and a truth-conscious existence. In this inevitable ascent, the mind of light is a gradation, an inevitable stage. As an evolving principle, it will mark a stage in the human ascent and evolve a new type of human being. This development must carry in it an ascending gradation of its own powers and types of an ascending humanity, which will embody more and more the turn towards spirituality, capacity for light, a climb towards a divinized manhood and the divine life. In the birth of the mind of light and its ascension into its own recognizable self and its true status and right province, there must be, in the very nature of things as they are and very nature of the evolutionary process as it is at present, two stages. In the first, we can see the mind of light gathering itself out of the ignorance, assembling its constituent elements, building up its shapes and types, however imperfect at first, and pushing them towards perfection till it can cross the border of ignorance and appear in the light, in its own light. In the second stage, we can see it developing itself in that greater natural light, taking its higher shapes and forms till it joins the supermind and lives as its subordinate portion or its delegate. In each case of these stages, it will define its own grades and manifest the order of its beings, who will embody it and give it to it a realized life. Thus there will be built up, first, even in the ignorance itself, the possibility of a human ascent towards a divine living. Then there will be, by the illumination of this mind of light, in the greater realization of what may be called a Gnostic mentality, in a transformation of the human being even before the supermind is reached, even in the earth consciousness, and in a humanity transformed and illumined divine life. Supermind and mind of light. The essential character of supermind is a truth consciousness which knows by its own inherent right of nature, by its own light. It has not to arrive at knowledge but possess it. It may indeed, especially in its evolutionary action, keep knowledge behind its apparent consciousness and bring it forward as if from behind the veil. But even then, this veil is only an appearance and does not really exist. The knowledge was always there, the consciousness its possessor and present revealer. This too is only in the evolutionary play, and on the supramental plane itself, the consciousness lives always in an immediacy of knowledge and acts by a direct immediacy of knowledge. In mind, as we see it here, the action is very different. It starts from an apparent absence of knowledge, a seeming ignorance or nescience, even in material nature, from an inconscience in which any kind of knowing does not seem at all to exist. It reaches knowledge or the action of knowledge by steps which are not at all immediate, but rather knowledge at first seems utterly impossible and foreign to the very substance of this matter. Yet, in the blindness of matter itself, there are signs of a concealed consciousness which in its hidden fundamental being sees and has the power to act according to its vision, and even by an infallible immediacy which is inherent in its nature. This is the same truth that is apparent in Supermind, but is here involved and seems not to be. The mind of light is a subordinate action of Supermind, dependent upon it even when not apparently springing direct from it, in which the secret of this connection becomes evident and palpable. The truth consciousness is not only a power of knowledge, it is a being of consciousness and knowledge, a luminous many-sided dynamis and play of the omniscient spirit. In it, there can be a spiritual feeling, a spiritual sensation, a spiritual essentiality of substance that knows and reveals, that acts and manifests in an omniscience which is one with omnipotence. In mind, this truth consciousness and these workings of the truth consciousness can be there, and even though it limits itself in mind and has a subordinate or an indirect working, its action can be essentially the same. There can even be a hidden immediacy which hints at the presence of something absolute, and its evidence of the same omnipotence and omniscience. In the mind of light, when it becomes full-orbed, this character of the truth reveals itself through in a garb that is transparent, even when it seems to cover. For this too is a truth consciousness and a self-power of knowledge. This too proceeds from the supermind and depends upon it, even though it is limited and subordinate. What we have called specifically the mind of light is indeed the last of a series of descending planes of consciousness in which the supermind veils itself by a self-chosen limitation or modification of its self-manifesting activities, but its essential character remains the same. There is in it an action of light, of truth, of knowledge in which inconscience, ignorance, and error claim no place. It proceeds from knowledge to knowledge. We have not yet crossed over the borders of the truth conscious into ignorance. The methods also are those of a self-luminous knowing and seeing and feeling, and a self-fulfilling action within its own borders. There is no need to seek for something missing, no fumbling, no hesitation. All is still a Gnostic action of a Gnostic power and principle. There has been a descent from full supermind into mind, but this mind, though self-limited, is not yet an agnostic consciousness, unsure of itself or unsure of its workings. There is still a comprehending or an apprehending consciousness which goes straight to its object and does not miss its mark to hunt for it in the dark or in insufficient light. It sees, knows, puts its hands immediately on things of self and things of nature. We have passed into mind, but mind has still not broken its inherent connection with the supramental principle. Still there is an increasing self-limitation which begins even with overmind. Overmind is separated by only a luminous border on the full light and power of the supramental truth, and it still commands direct access to all that supermind can give it. There is a further limitation or change of characteristic action at each step downwards from overmind to intuition, from intuition to illumined mind, from illumined mind to what I have called the higher mind. The mind of light is a transitional passage by which we can pass from supermind and superhumanity to an illumined humanity. For the new humanity will be capable of at least a partly divinized way of seeing and living, because it will live in the light and in knowledge and not in the obscuration of the ignorance. Still, again, there will be a difference between the superhuman and the human, a difference in nature and the power, but a difference especially in the access and way of admission to the truth consciousness and its activities. There may indeed be two orders of its truth, direct and half-direct, immediate and near, or even only a reception at a distance. But this we must consider afterwards. At present, it is sufficient to mark certain differences in the descending order of Gnostic mind, which culminates here. We may say that there is a higher hemisphere of our being in which mind, luminous and aware of its workings, still lives in the light and can be seen as a subordinate power of the supermind. It is still an agent of the truth consciousness, a Gnostic power that has not descended into the mental ignorance. It is capable of a mental gnosis that preserves its connection with the superior light and acts by its power. This is the character of overmind in its own plane and all the powers that are dependent on the overmind. The supermind works there, but at one remove, as if in something that it has put forth from itself, but which is no longer entirely itself, but is still a delegate of the truth and invested with its authority. We are moving towards a transitional border beyond which lies the possibility of the ignorance. But the ignorance is not yet here. In the order of the evolutionary descent, we stand in the mind of light on that border, and a step downward can carry us beyond it into the beginnings of an ignorance which still bears on its face something of the luminosity that it is leaving behind it. On the other hand, in the ascending order of the evolution, we reach a transition in which we see the light, are turned towards it, reflected in our consciousness, and one further step carries us into the domain of the light. The truth becomes visible and audible to us, and we are in immediate communication with its messages and illuminations, and can grow into it and be made one with its substance. Thus there is a succession of ranges of consciousness which we can speak of as mind, but which belongs practically to the higher hemisphere, although in their ontological station they are within the domain of the lower hemisphere. For the whole of being is a connected totality, and there is in it no abrupt passage from the principle of truth and light into their opposite. The creative truth of things works and can work infallibly, even in the inconscient. The spirit is there in matter, and it has made a series of steps by which it can travel from it to its own heights in an uninterrupted line of gradations. The depths are linked to the heights, and the law of the one truth creates and works everywhere. Even in the material world, which seems to us a world of ignorance, a world of the workings of a blind and inconscient force starting from inconscience and proceeding through ignorance and reaching with difficulty towards an imperfect light and knowledge, there is still a secret truth in things which arranges all, guides towards the self many contrary powers of being, and rises towards its own heights, where it can manifest its own highest truth and fulfill the secret purpose of the universe. Even this material world of existence is built upon a pattern of the truth in things which we call law of nature, a truth from which we climb to a greater truth until we emerge in the light of the Supreme. This world is not really created by a blind force of nature. Even in the inconscient, the presence of the Supreme Truth is at work. There is a seeing power behind it, which acts infallibly, and the steps of the ignorance itself are guided, even when they seem to stumble. For what we call the ignorance is a cloak to knowledge, a knowledge at work in a body, not its own, but moving towards its own supreme self-discovery. This knowledge is the covert supermind, which is the support of the creation and is leading all towards itself and guides behind this multitude of minds and creatures and objects, which seem each to be following its own law of nature. In this vast and apparently confused mass of existence, there is a law, a one truth of being, a guiding and fulfilling purpose of the world existence. The supermind is veiled here and does not work according to its characteristic law of being and self-knowledge, but without it nothing could reach its aim. A world governed by an ignorant mind would soon drift into a chaos. It could not, in fact, come into existence or remain in existence unless supported by the secret omniscience of which it is the cover. A world governed by a blind, inconscient force might repeat constantly the same mechanical workings, but it would mean nothing and arrive nowhere. This could not be the cause of an evolution that creates life out of matter, out of life mind, and a gradation of planes of matter, life, and mind culminating in the emergence of supermind. The secret truth that emerges in supermind has been there all the time, but now it manifests itself and the truth in things and the meaning of our existence. It is in this series of order of existence and as the last word of the lower hemisphere of being, the first word of the higher hemisphere, that we have to look at the mind of light and see what is its nature and the powers which characterize it and which it uses for its self-manifestation and workings, its connection with supermind and its consequences and possibilities for the new life of a new humanity. And this concludes the reading of Mind of Light by Sri Auribundo. Please do hit the like button, share this with like-minded friends, and subscribe to the channel.